Welcome to all our guests. Welcome to all our authors. A warm welcome from Tuğçe and me, and from Birgül Hoca. On behalf of all the team, we would like to welcome you. I'm very much excited, and I'm sure you noticed it from my voice. We met with Cynthia in 2019 before the COVID pandemic. She visited us at TED University, and we had great discussions and talks and two wonderful events. And at that time, we were talking about the concept of sustainable patriarchy. We were talking about what we could do. We wanted to continue cooperation, and we did that indeed with various interviews that we were able to do with you. And later on, we began to work on a special issue for a journal. And in the end, it took us longer than expected. And it was a lot of work. And Birgül Hoca has done more than me, has put more efforts than me on that special issue indeed. So in the end, we were able to publish our articles in the journal Turkish Studies, which is a mainstream journal, and we are very happy to be able to have this special section on gender and sustainable patriarchy in Turkey. Let me begin with an introduction of Professor Cynthia Enloe. You all know her, but I would like to talk a bit about her. She made her BA in Connecticut College in New London. Thereafter, her MA in the University of California, and her PhD again in the University of California. She's research professor in the Department of Sustainability and Social Justice at Clark University, and she's affiliated with Clark's Women's and Gender Studies and Political Science programs. Her career has included Fulbrights in Malaysia and Guyana, guest professorships in Japan, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Iceland, in many, many places. Indeed, she has published in various journals. She has 15 books, including Maneuvers, The International Politics of Militarizing Women's Lives, The Curious Feminist, and Nimu's War, Emma's War, The Real State of America. She has so many publications, and her newest book is entitled 12 Feminist Lessons of War. I will be very happy to listen about your newest book also. But now I want to leave the floor for you. Thank you again for accepting our invitation. Welcome again. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Suhal. It's lovely to be back with you and with your fabulous team and with all of you joining. I'm really delighted and honored. I had a wonderful time at TED University in Ankara, and we had many good conversations. We went to museum exhibitions that also were very enlightening. It was a wonderful visit that I still think about. The reason I started thinking about what I call sustainable patriarchy, which is the core of your special section in Turkish Studies, which is a wonderful place to have created this special section. I hope all of you will read it, including those of you who usually read the journal, but don't necessarily think that patriarchy is a topic for you. But I began thinking about it when I became affiliated with a department at my own university that is now deeply involved in climate change and gender in climate change. My partner also is a feminist geographer and environmentalist and thinks a lot about sustainability. So I began thinking about sustainability. In fact, my department has just changed its name. As you heard Suhal mention, my department has changed its name to Sustainability and Social Justice Studies. So sustainability seems so positive. But I began thinking, and I'm not a depressed person, but I kind of keep my eyes open. I'm not a pessimist. In fact, I'm an optimist, but I figure you can't be an optimist if you don't know what reality is. And so I began thinking about sustainability. And I began thinking about, well, it depends what you sustain. There are things that we don't want to be sustained. There are things that, in fact, the sustaining of hurts us all. And so I began thinking, well, how does patriarchy, which I think does damage civic society, it damages the environment, and it damages our relationships to each other and to civic life. I began thinking about, well, how does patriarchy get sustained? And I was, whoops, do we have a problem? Whoops.
We muted that.
Okay, okay, that's okay.
Sorry for that.
We're all used to this.
Yes.
We're very savvy, And so I began thinking about sustainability, and I began thinking about it when I was doing a study of international banking. Now, I should alert you that I am not a banking specialist, but this was during the crash of 2008, and I began listening to people who were interviewing hedge fund managers and other financial alleged wizards in many countries. Well, very specifically in the US, Iceland, and the UK, because I tend to be quite grounded. You could do your own study of Turkish bankers, not just banking, bankers, to do this same kind of investigation. And I began thinking, well, contemporary bankers think of themselves as actually quite hip. It's a kind of masculinity that is not about wearing old-fashioned pinstripe suits. It's not about being overweight and smoking cigars, the old cartoons of capitalist bankers. And I thought, well, that's not these new guys. These new guys in Iceland and the UK and the US, they think of themselves as actually very with it, very hip. And I thought, but they're even more deeply patriarchal. So what am I looking at here? And I began, as all of us as feminists do, I began looking at the modernization of patriarchal masculinity. How does the notion of the model of manliness in banking get updated in a way that keeps it a masculinized profession, a masculinized organizational culture, and a masculinized notion of what success as a banker is? And that really got me going. And then when I came along and had just published the book that Suhal mentioned called The Big Push, and the subtitle I gave it was deliberately The Persistence of Patriarchy, because I'm very interested in persistence. Now, there are two ways, this is not news to you all, but just to get us all on the same plane here. There are two ways to persist in patriarchy. One way, and it matters that we keep documenting it and investigating it, is outright repression. This is arresting feminists as security risks. This is suppressing feminist ideas in policy discussions. This is repression and resistance. That is patriarchal resistance to seeing domestic violence as a violation of civil rights. This is the resistance to thinking of childcare as a civic good. That is, there's outright resistance, and that should continue to be investigated. It's not old hat. It's as contemporary as all of you who can't get affordable childcare. It's it is today. So resistance, and a lot of us have investigated this resistance, and I think we need to keep doing it. But I'm also aware that people who benefit from patriarchy, mostly men, but not all men, of course, mostly men, but some women as well, who have convinced themselves that they benefit from patriarchy, they also adapt and learn. And I began thinking, well, how do patriarchal people, how do they learn? And what do they learn? And what I realized is that they learn how to engage in tokenism. They learn how to talk the talk, as we say, but not walk the walk. I don't know how you'd say that in Turkish, but I bet there's the equivalent. Do you just talk the talk, or do you also walk the walk? And patriarchs in many countries have learned how to talk the talk, that is, be superficial, without making genuine change, especially change that would upset their privilege. One of the ways to do that is to say, okay, we'll have a ministry for women's affairs, but we will make it the Ministry for Women's and Family Affairs. And that will compromise women's rights, because women's rights are contingent, these patriarchs believe, on a certain notion of family being sustained. So the sustainability strategies of patriarchs are worth watching, and watching not because we're not going to watch resistance and oppression, but because the two go together. So recently there was and if any of you want, I'll send the link to Zuhal, and then you can ask her for it. There's a wonderful French feminist with years of work inside the United Nations named Nadine Puchkabal. And she has been a gender advisor to many UN peace operations. And she just gave a wonderful interview, because she and I have had many conversations about the sustainability of patriarchy inside the UN. And so for instance, she said, well, here's one of the ways you sustain patriarchy inside the United Nations, because there are certain organizations, and the United Nations would be one of them, and certain political parties and certain institutions who cannot afford to be blatantly discriminatory. So they have to think, their executives have to think up ways to not seem to be outright and blatantly discriminatory, and yet sustain their masculine privilege. And the UN is one of those. The United Nations, because of its founding principles, and because of its need for legitimacy in this very complicated world, the United Nations as an institution cannot afford to seem outright discriminatory. It cannot afford to seem a bastion of male privilege. So it has people inside the United Nations, people that Nadine has worked with for years, people like that Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Madeleine Rees, as the Secretary General, have worked with for years. These people like Madeleine Rees of WILP and Nadine Puchkabal, who's a gender advisor, they know how sustainability of patriarchy works inside the United Nations. Now, there are going to be other political parties, other governments, other ministries, other international organizations and economic organizations that don't feel any need for that kind of legitimacy, but the UN does. And so what Nadine's warned us, and I'll send you the link, and then you can pass it on to anybody who wants. She just did an interview, and this is her interview. She said, well, the first thing is to create the position of gender advisor in all UN peacekeeping operations. UN peacekeeping operations cannot appear blatantly patriarchal. Not at this point in history. This is a feminist success that really dates from the 1990s. It's very specific that the feminists who lobby and operate inside and outside the UN have had a success in persuading the United Nations that they cannot be blatantly masculinist in their peacekeeping operations. And that's a success. But then watch what the people who are committed to patriarchy do to get around or dig underneath or leap over that feminist success. She said what they do is now they create gender advisors. And then they don't give them a budget. Or they appoint them late in the whole peacekeeping operation step-by-step system so that by the time they come in, most of the groundwork for that peacekeeping operation has been set, and the gender advisor isn't going to have much sway at all because it's too late. And the third thing she said is that they appoint as gender advisor somebody who already has 3 other jobs. That's absolutely classic. Or they appoint a woman who actually has no gender expertise. But the idea is that if she's a woman, of course, she must have gender expertise. But we all know that gaining gender expertise takes work, it takes careful study, you have to develop skills you never have had before. It's not just by being a woman. And so she said those 3 strategies mean that the United Nations now looks on paper as if it has gender advising as integral to every peacekeeping operation. But Nadine, who's been a gender advisor, she knows exactly how this works. She says they have been deprived deliberately of any of the tools that allow them to have an impact on the masculinization of a peacekeeping operation. Another thing that Nadine has noted is that people clean up their language. And you've all probably noticed this, where officials of the state especially would used to refer to our sons as being, the future of the nation. Now say our sons and daughters, right? They kind of cleaned it up a little bit, especially if women vote, And what she says is that watch any organization's speakers as to how they clean up their language without cleaning up their act. That's talking the talk without walking the walk. And she said, one of the classic phrases in English now throughout the United Nations, not just in peacekeeping, in all kinds of operations, is, and this is the post-patriarchal faked language. The official says, we have a long way to go. Now, we have a long way to go suggests that, well, we've at least made some headway against masculine privilege. But we know we have a long way to go. And what that does is supposed to silence critics who say, oh my God, look at all you haven't done. Look at all you've left in place that still privileges certain kinds of masculinity. We have a long way to go. And she said that phrase is repeated daily within many agencies of the United Nations, but I hear it also in a lot of organizational settings. We have a long way to go, which says, well, we are making progress, but we know that we still have a long way to go. I began in this latest book that Suhal mentioned, 12 Feminist Lessons of War, I began thinking of what are the other kinds of framings that people in positions of power use so that they will silence or at least diminish the critics. And one is later. Later. I now write later with quotes around it because this is my bumper sticker. This is my newest feminist bumper sticker. I need a lot more bumpers since I make up bumper sticker kinds of feminist declarations, I think. But anyway, my latest bumper sticker feminist understanding is that later is a patriarchal time zone. Later is a patriarchal time zone. It makes the speaker sound as if they have good intentions, but it's going to be for later. Now, one of the reasons this sustains patriarchy is because by the time later comes, there's no more budget left. All the crucial decisions have been made. All the crucial pipeline appointments are in place. And so later actually never comes. Later is a patriarchal time zone. And it goes right along with Nadine's revelation about we have a long way to go. So language matters in sustaining patriarchy because it gives patriarchy time to put down the roots of masculinized privilege even deeper. And by the time feminists and their allies have been able to make an impact, so many crucial decisions have already been made. So I think where we study, and this is one of the things I love about the special section of Turkish Studies, which I recommend all of you to read and pass around and maybe have small book groups or conferences like this. But think of also others, is to take very particular sites. That is, it is important to talk about patriarchal systems as a whole. But it's also, I think, increasingly important, well, it's always been important in feminist studies, is look at the gritty realities in specific places. Look at specific, not just political parties, but political party processes. Look at specific relationships to women and courts. I know you've been doing this in Turkey. Look at specific international organizations that operate in the country. Look at specific banks and other international operating, but locally operating economic institutions. And in Turkey, that would, of course, mean construction companies. I've never seen a feminist analysis of a construction company. And yet, from everything that Zuhal and all of you have taught me, one cannot understand Turkish political life today if one doesn't understand construction companies, including the executives, not just the workers, the executives and contracts. And so take very specific places, sites, and try to look at the two kinds of persistences of patriarchy. There's two kinds of strategies. One, outright resistance, an absolute refusal by construction company hiring executives to hire women as plumbers, just an outright refusal. But also look at the walking the walk without talking the talk kind of persistence of sustainable patriarchy, and put the two together, and then do what you're doing here, which I just love, is you're trading notes. You say, well, this is what I found in the courts, but this is what I found in the schools, and this is what I found in the political parties, and this is what I found in the international relations departments, you know, which also sustain patriarchy. So do very gritty. I'm a believer in the gritty investigation of sustainable patriarchy, and where it fails, that is where it gets called out. I mean, this is one of the great successes of the hashtag #MeToo movement around the world, in television news studios, or in law firms, or in senior research labs. I mean, it doesn't always work, sustainable patriarchy. I mean, let's not give them more power than they deserve, right? They lose, and that becomes a quote unquote scandal. I'm very wary of the word scandal. It just means that we've all underestimated the awfulness, and then when we hear the awfulness, we're scandalized. But scandals become very interesting for that very reason, because they do show the sustainable patriarchy oftentimes fails, and people call it out, and people can see the difference between window dressing, as they call it, and the real behind the scenes operation. So do really, and get your students to do, I mean, this is the great thing, get your students also, because many of you teach, I know, and I'm greedy, so if I can't do something, I really hope my students will become interested and do the investigation. This is why we love teaching, right? Because we learn from our students. And then perhaps I'm full of ideas for work for you to do. Look out. And that is, have maybe a conference, a mini conference that compares Turkish sustainable patriarchy and how it works with maybe Hungarian or Polish or any country sustainable patriarchy. Do cross-national comparisons, maybe just 2 or 3 countries. Don't try to do 8, right? Because you go for depth. And each will have researchers whose spirits are boosted because they think, oh, I never thought of doing that kind of investigation in my country. But look what the Turkish feminists are doing. I could do that in Hungary, or I could do that in Poland, or I could do that, you name the country. So it would be a great, again, me dreaming up work for you all, but it would be a great cross-national cooperation, but also boost to each other. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm happy to take questions or have comments or hear what you all are thinking, because you'll make me smarter. That's always a good thing. Thank you, Zahal.
Thank you so much. Indeed, very inspirational. I also love your later as a patriarchal time zone concept, that idea, because I believe that all feminists have at least many times heard this, not now. Whatever we demand, others say, not now, it's too early, we need to do this and that beforehand, but that never comes, as you say. So thank you very much indeed. One Turkish word or concept that came to my mind while you were talking is the concept called yarım ağız. That means half mouth. So something is said, but it's just with half of the mouth, so it's not really meant sincerely.
Oh,
So
interesting.
maybe that could be from the Turkish side.
That would be great.
That could be useful in this regard. Now, again, thank you very much. I would like to leave the floor for questions from our guests. Let me also look at the chat. We have one question from Elif Demircan. She asks, thank you so much for the speech. I was wondering what made you gain interest in Turkish patriarchy? So your personal interest in Turkey and Turkish patriarchy then.
Turkish feminists is who made me interested, right? And particularly Zuhal and another Turkish feminist who many of you know, Ayşegül Altınay. And Ayşegül first brought me to Turkey, about which I knew embarrassingly little, in 2003. And Ayşegül, and if any of you know her, please pass on hi. We keep in touch, but I haven't been in touch for a couple of weeks anyway. And Ayşegül, when she brought me to Sabancı University, whose administration now, by the way, this is outright. This is sustainable. Well, it's hard to know. But they're actually trying to squeeze women's and gender studies at Sabancı into unrecognizable, unfeminist studies. So that's where you keep the name, but you squeeze out any genuine investigations and teaching. And Ayşe, though, at that point, Sabancı was very vibrant in its women's studies program. And she had me meet students as well as other faculty, the way Zuhal did at TED. I love meeting other faculty, but I also like meeting students, that's the future. And, but she also made sure that I went to Diyarbakir and that I came to Ankara and Izmir. And thank you for this really good question, because it doesn't mean I don't speak Turkish. I mean, that's terrible. And I certainly haven't been everywhere in Turkey. But it does mean that because I've been invited back several times as Turkish politics have changed, I've been kept interested. And Turkey is such an important country and has such a vibrant history of women's organizing and women's thinking. And I became really appreciative of it and learned from it. And I'm still learning. I mean, that's why I was so delighted to be a part of today's, because I'm still learning. But that's why. And I think that we all of us in many parts of the world need to learn from Turkish feminists.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Elif also is thanking you. Now, do we have more questions? You can open your
Or
microphone.
examples.
Yes, indeed. Birgil Hoca, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Enloe, for your so insightful speech. I have one comment and one question. In my research, with regard to the perceptions of male academics in Turkey toward gender.
Oh, I read that. Yes.
Thank you so much. One of them told me that at his university, the gender issue is being used for promotional purposes. The university administration thinks that now it is the time to talk about gender equality. It is so fashionable. And the university has established a center for gender studies. But he also mentioned that, in fact, that gender equality has not been internalized at the university. And they just use it for promotion. In Turkey, there is so much competition among the universities, mainly among the
interesting.
Foundation universities, because they want to attract the best students, and they want to use some fashionable instruments for that. And at some universities, the centers for gender studies are being used for promotion. I mean, that is one of the things that I learned from my interviews. I have never thought about it. Whenever I see a center for gender studies at university, I thought, so nice, that university is paying so much attention to it, but using it for promotion, I mean, it is really kind of disturbing, in fact. I mean,
it's very disturbing, and it is part of sustainable patriarchy. That is, you leave in place, in this case, a Department of Gender Studies, or as Nadine was saying, in peacekeeping operations, you create gender advisors to peacekeeping operations, but then you hollow them out. And in fact, that's what, with your professor who you were interviewing, that's what alerts you to. So what does hollowing out a gender studies program look like so that the university can both use it to say we are in the forefront of intellectual life to an 18-year-old bright Turkish student finishing secondary school, come to us because this is where you'll get intellectual study at its foremost, and yet hollow out the gender studies program so that in fact the student will have their hopes dashed. Now, what becomes really interesting then as well, again, this is me thinking of things for everybody else to study, and that is what happens to students who may have studied feminism a bit, may have even had a high school teacher who introduced them to the women's movement before Ataturk, or, you know, they have some idea of what they want to study, and they get to this university that has hollowed out the gender program, but still used it for their own recruiting promotion. What happens to that student when she begins to look for classes, or he begins to look for classes and finds, well, this isn't what I thought it meant to study gender studies at a good university? What do those students do with their disappointment? Do they just think, well, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe, gosh, maybe gender studies isn't what I thought it was. Maybe it is all about the promotion of marriage and the family. But gosh, I didn't think that. I thought it was about the suffrage movement and about equal pay and about ending violence against women. But look, that's not what I'm getting to study. What do they do with their disappointment? Because my guess is at this university, and probably others that are currently having their gender studies programs hollowed out, left in place, put up as a flag of promotion, but distorted, made shallow, in fact, made patriarchal. What do those students do with their disappointment? I'd love to know.
Yes, Hocam. Indeed. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for this. We have indeed one more question coming from Gülay Toksöz, who's also very important academic. Welcome to this event, Gülay Hocam. In Western countries, she says, some feminists started to use revival of masculine restoration to explain the anti-gender movements. However, your conceptualization of sustainable patriarchy points to the persistence of domination and is much more appropriate for countries like Turkey. Thank you. Would you like to comment on this?
I don't even think so-called Western countries, and I tend not to use that term. If we're talking about Western Europe and North America, that's what I say. I really, this is now an aside. This is my, you know, where you put the asterisk and then you put your comment down at the bottom of the page. I try not to use Western. You know, what in the hell is Western? Is Western Peru? You know, supposedly it's in the Western Hemisphere. Anyway, you just hit something for me. So if I'm talking about Western Europe, the Netherlands, Sweden, Canada, in North America, and the US, then I try to say. So I think I'm not so sure that in any of those countries, that's a success story of building up a certain kind of masculinity. I think where I watch it is in military recruitment. Now, in Turkey, of course, you still have compulsory male conscription. But the Turkish military needs more than conscripts. They need people to stay on as career officers, and they need additional volunteers. So even Turkey, with compulsory male conscription into the military, also needs to persuade others to voluntarily stay longer or to join as volunteers. And in the US and Canada and the Netherlands and the UK and France and Italy, I look at recruiters, and recruiters still try to bolster their recruiting quotas, because all of them have done away with compulsory, well, Sweden has reintroduced it, compulsory male military service, but they all need masculinity. And every recruiter I've ever heard talk says without ideas of patriarchal manliness, I would never be able to fill my monthly recruiting quota. They all have quotas. And that says to me that while there in every country, there are varieties of masculinities, always in contest. There may be some that are more dominant than others, but there are always varieties, and they're in relationship to each other, even within families. Older brothers aren't like younger brothers, and they contest with each other who's really becoming manly. But even given the variety of masculinities, militaries in Western Europe and North America still play on very conventional notions of masculinity to fill their military quotas. And my guess is that's also true in Turkey. How to convince parents that their sons will become more appropriately manly if they don't become conscientious objectors, if they obey the conscription law. Militaries aren't the only, they certainly aren't the only institutions that wield old-fashioned, what I think of as old-fashioned patriarchal masculinity, but they're one of the ones that I watch, because I'm very interested in how, to use the term manpower, always in quotes, but essentially personnel strategists in militaries, including the Turkish military. How do they go about filling their ranks? And it's always harder than they will admit. They have to persuade mothers about what it means to raise a proper son. They have to persuade sports athletic coaches, who oftentimes are very influential in young men's lives, to promote military service as something good for the young men they have influence over. So I'm always skeptical of any presumption that militaries always get the manpower they need. They work much harder at it than they'll admit. And the fact they won't admit it is part of sustainable patriarchy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cynthia. I assume the question was also on the conceptualization of restoration of masculinity would mean that at one point masculinity got lesser or patriarchy got lesser. But in your concept, we notice it didn't even diminish a bit. It was there and it is still sustained. It is still kept. There's no restoration of it because it is still there.
It never went away. I think it's true. I mean, again, I don't want to underestimate feminist successes, right? So in that sense, people who benefit from patriarchy did get scared when more women entered the paid labor force, when more women were willing to speak out about violence by their male partners, when more women ran for public office, when more women pursued jobs in academia and journalism. That's all since the 1950s, especially, but especially since the 1970s. And that did scare a lot of people who are patriarchal, including some women who became very conservative because they thought they benefited from patriarchy. So I think you're absolutely right that the restoration project went into higher gear in the 1980s and 90s. And that's when I watched patriarchal people crafting these new sustainable, more camouflaged kind of strategies. It took them time to learn, you know. And perhaps the 70s and early 80s was the time when there was some fear that patriarchy and a certain kind of male privilege, or the privileging of certain kind of masculinity, I should say, when that looked as though it was on the defensive. But patriarchal people learned, and they learned to be more subtle. They learned to camouflage their patriarchal restoration. They learned to be less obvious and to talk the talk without walking the walk. You know, we have a long way to go. Our sons and daughters, you know, they cleaned up their language. And they perfected the strategies of window dressing. And I think that, so that's why things don't just stay the same. I think the big learning, but you'd have to tell me this, if this is true in any of the corners or cores of Turkey that you looked at, maybe particular political parties, or particular commercial institutions. When were they kind of on the defensive and confused? And when did they start learning their new camouflage strategies? And my guess is that makes, well, you'd have to tell me, it probably differs by institution, but it probably makes the 1990s really interesting. So I mean, we all are. I'm not a historian, but I'm a wannabe historian. Well, I can't be because I'm not trained, but we're all historically minded, right? We all watch various relationships that are patriarchal. We watch them over time. And your question really makes me think about, when was the big learning process? When was the defensive process? And it was just pure resistance. They voted down bills. They dismissed complaints of violence. And when did they begin to move into a much more subtle kind of window dressing, hollowing out? At first, they didn't know what to do with the gender studies department in a university. The hollowing out is new. That's a new strategy. Leave in place the thing with the letterhead. Deceive the students who really want a good gender education. Leave it all in place. Engage in deception. When did that happen? My guess is university by university, you could date it.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for your answer. In Turkey, it is in the same line indeed. We have an increasing number of centers, also for centers for gender studies, which are asked to change their names into women and family, always with the family added. Some of my colleagues and friends say we still do the same work. It's just a change in name. We were forced to, but it is so sad, and they feel they had to give in to that demand.
Well, that's pressure. That's pressure. You know, budgetary pressure.
Yes.
That's promotion pressure. Yes. It's job pressure.
Yes. And they still, of course, continue their resistance, but under another name of their centers for sure. So thank you very much. Thank you also for your question, Gülay Hocam. The next question comes from Gülçin John Wright, who's from Sociology Department of TED University. Gülçin Hocam asks, what might be the self-critique to some gender equality measures at private companies or even at the state level for reinforcing heteronormative and binary constructions? Including ourselves as feminist scholars working at gender studies centers, are we actually inclusive in our understanding of gender? What is the way forward?
Well, that's a very good question. And it's one that takes a lot of subtlety and a lot, and you're hinting at it too, a lot of candor. That is a lot of self-reflection. I think gender from the beginning even of the suffrage movement. The Turkish suffrage movement of the early 1900s, pre-Ataturk, and certainly the suffrage movement in many countries in the early 1900s or even late 1800s. Always, they may have talked in terms of men and women and boys and girls, but they always had a very broad and fluid understanding of gender. I don't think most second wave feminists in most countries ever adopted a strictly binary notion of womanhood, girlhood, boyhood, or manhood. One of the things I first remember, this is when I was a new feminist, didn't know anything really. I was just learning, but it was so exciting. I was learning everything by the minute, You remember, everybody remembers those exciting days, whenever they were for you. And I remember the first studies, I don't know if there's a term for this in Turkish, the first studies of tomboys. Tomboys in especially American English are girls who want to climb trees, girls who want to play baseball, girls who want to, ride their bikes fast, girls who don't want to dress in dresses, give their mothers a hard time, in other words. Although, you know what? My mother never said I couldn't wear blue jeans and go out and play with the neighborhood boys. My mother, who was looking as if if you looked at her life, you'd think, oh, a suburban white American woman, married, right? But you know what? She never thought that her daughter had to kind of look like some classic feminine girl. And you could tell because she never told me what I had to do after school. I played sports. My mother drove a station wagon. She really was a suburban mom. But what she did is she drove a station wagon full of girls who were playing field hockey. That was my mom. She wasn't taking us to dance classes or whatever suburban moms supposedly do. And this made me think that this is now in the 1970s and 80s when the idea of the tomboy became very interesting to brand new women's studies researchers. And so I guess to respond to your question, it doesn't mean that we're not in a very particular moment to look at varieties and the fluidity amongst the varieties of boyhoods and manhoods and girlhoods and womanhoods. And a lot of young people want to use they in English because they are afraid of any pronoun being a prison. But I don't think that's necessarily an accurate understanding of how feminism has developed. Again, we're talking about the 1890s when a lot of suffragists began to say they want to wear pants. That's what they were called, bloomers, named after the woman named Bloomer who created the pants. And so I think what we shouldn't do is imagine that early feminism was stuck in binaries. It wasn't. I mean, if we look at it, look at what they dared to do and dared to have their daughters do and dared to have their friends do. And it was much broader than simply a narrow set of binaries. I think now the positing of binaries as if that's the norm really underestimates what feminists in all kinds of cultures really have done over the decades. So while today and the discussion about trans gender is really important, it is part of an ongoing, not new, but an ongoing, long history of feminists thinking about the multiplicities of genders, including my mom letting me play in jeans in the after-school field hockey, right? That we shouldn't, it's really important not to turn earlier feminists into cartoons. That's really important. And that is a classic thing to do amongst generations, you know, but we should resist it. We should look really carefully at what, in fact, was the complexity and the openness and the rebelliousness of early feminists in each of our own countries, so that we do not buy into the notion, oh, that they were stuck in binaries. They weren't. I really don't think they were. Certainly my early feminist friends in the second wave, and the second wave is late, you know. We're not stuck in binaries at all.
All right. Thank you very much, Cynthia. We have a question from distinguished Yıldız Ecevit. Yıldız Hocam, we're very happy to have you here. Her question is, thank you for the very illuminating talk, Cynthia. Do you see a radical change in sustainable patriarchy since 1980s in Western world? I mean, is there a strong relationship between new liberalism and new conservatism and persistence of patriarchy?
Well, I think patriarchs are learning from each other. I mean, Orban in Hungary, I mean, when was the last time in global affairs that a Hungarian, and I don't mean Austro-Hungarian imperial, I mean Hungarian social figure was a model for patriarchal strategizing? And so I think there's a lot of learning going on. And the learning can sometimes be quite, as they say, below the radar. I remember I was giving a talk to quite a big audience in Brisbane, Australia. I think it may have been the same year, Zuhal, that I was at TED, something 2019. And the talk was about the international politics of sexual harassment and the Me Too movement, which really took off in 2017. Sexual harassment was first named in 1979. So if you're creating a feminist historical account of challenges to patriarchy, write down 1979. Anyway, but this was 2019 when the international Me Too movement was taking off. And in this big auditorium in Australia, I said, well, one of the things I'm beginning to notice, this is about the global trading amongst patriarchal people of their own sustainability strategies. That's what I was trying to map. And I said, I've noticed, but I don't know enough about law. I've noticed that a number of law firms who advise contractors on hiring contract language are now inserting what's the term? where you cannot talk about the terms of your contract. And there's a special term for that. It's a legal term, but it's a devastating legal term because it means that women who settle a sexual harassment complaint inside their own company cannot talk about either the complaint or the settlement. Non-disclosure. And up in the balcony, I can remember this, up in the balcony, a woman shouted out in this big auditorium, said, "Oh, that's come to Australia." Said, "I'm a contractor now for a big international firm. And I found that non-disclosure requirement in my contract. And I didn't know what to do with it. I wanted the job. I felt I had to sign the contract. But if I signed the contract, it means if I was ever sexually harassed, I could, and found a way to settle, I could never talk about it." And so the state of California, this is, operating place by place, site by site, feminists in California have gotten the California state legislature, maybe you can look at this, to write a law that prohibits non-disclosure agreements being written into labor contracts. So patriarchs are learning. Law firms trade with law firms about how to silence women. But you know what? Feminists learn too. We're not just sitting by and watching the patriarchs do their sustainability thing. We're watching and we're learning. And in California, feminists persuaded the state legislature to say, no, that sustainability strategy will not hold here in California labor law. So learning is going on in both directions. And the Orban phenomenon is real. And I know several of you have worked with Hungarian feminist researchers who are terrific. And so the Orban phenomenon is interesting, not because, well, I am interested in Hungarian women and Hungarian girls and patriarchy in Hungary, but I'm also interested in how American evangelicals have adopted Viktor Orban as kind of a lesson master.
Yes, indeed. And sometimes I'm wondering, at one point, maybe these neoconservatives will bring up an international organization by themselves, similar to socialist internationals. We can maybe at one point see a neoconservative international because they are so
Oh, I think they've already started organizing. It'd be worth looking at. They have started organizing. A lot of times the networking is done in the United Nations.
Yes.
To try and keep the United Nations from declaring transgender people as worthy of rights, to try and reduce women's reproductive rights internationally. And those networks, and the Vatican is oftentimes very important in building those networks. And they're networks of conservatives from various religious backgrounds. Not only Christian, but also Muslim and Hindu and Buddhist. I mean, there are Buddhist patriarchs. Don't ever imagine there aren't. Just look at Thailand and Burma or Myanmar.
Yes. So patriarchy is a very, very international, very global concept.
It is.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your answer. Our next question comes from Burcu Sarıkarademir. Burcu Hoca is also from TED University. She says, thank you very much for the inspiring talk. In Birgül Hoca's article, she talks about the structures and individuals who are complicit in patriarchy, and they should be unearthed as they play a role in reforming and maintaining patriarchy. You also talked about women benefiting from patriarchy. When I asked the question of how we should face the women or our colleagues who are complicit in patriarchy in academia, I received the answer that we should not be pointing to each other as sisters, or that we should deal with it later. uh, how we should break patriarchy's alliances with women or forgive them for the personal betrayals without being personal.
Without being personal. I mean, we all do this in our workplaces, don't we? I mean, and one has to do it with mutual respect, even if you strongly disagree with somebody's, what you see as complicity. But I think one has to, I mean, I'm not always successful in this. I work very hard at it, but I know you can't ever come across as condescending. You can't ever come across as a know-it-all. You can't ever come across as arrogant. And you can't ever come across as elitist. And while all of us as feminists know that, it is sometimes hard to adjust our tone of voice, our postures, our languages, and also what places to do it in. So one of the things that we've learned is it's better to have private conversations. Don't embarrass somebody, especially amongst their patriarchal male colleagues. I mean, it's just the way we teach. We try not to embarrass students, right? That's not learning. Well, it's true of our colleagues as well. It takes a lot of work, a lot of humility and respect. And I think sometimes what is most persuasive is to talk about reflectively about one's own complicity. That to remember when, oh my God, I didn't speak up. Oh, I kind of let that go because I was afraid I would hurt my chances for tenure. Or I really should have resisted that openly, but I was nervous about speaking up when senior professors were in the room. It's always more persuasive. We all know this. If you can give yourself as an example of complicity, of surrender, and of personal greed. And I don't just mean greed for money. I mean greed for recognition, greed for getting on a panel, greed for becoming a chair, greed for being an editor, whatever one aspires to. And if one talks about how patriarchy works and shows how patriarchy needs women to be complicit, and put it that way rather than pointing out at the finger of you are being complicit, you are betraying, and give examples where, including yourself, where patriarchy has managed to silence women who are fearful, to silence women who are ambitious, to silence women who feel vulnerable, and make it clear that this is the operation of a system and we're in it. And the second thing is to say, when you are on the brink of feeling as if you're complicit, talk to another woman. Admit, oh my God, in that last department meeting, I knew I should have said something and I didn't. But say it to somebody else and the other person will say, you know, I didn't say anything either. Let's talk about that. Don't ever let a person who's being, this will be hard because not everybody's, you know, women aren't angels. Feminism has never said that women are always angelic and heroic and courageous. We're not. We're vulnerable and we're, you know, scared and we're ambitious. But talking about the way the system wants us to be complicit, ambitious, individualistic, and quiet, and needs us. They need us to go along so they can point to us as evidence that they're not sexist. It takes work, though, but we're up for it.
Indeed, we're ready to work a lot for sure. Burcu Hoca has also added the Turkish concept for tomboy,
Ah,
erkek Fatma, which means man Fatma or male Fatma. Fatma is a woman's name
name.
normally for sure. So similar to tomboy, she added this while you were talking about
Oh, very interesting.
concept
Very
of
interesting. I think tomboy across cultures is really interesting to think about. That would be a great special issue.
yes, we have to think about it, Birgül
Yeah.
Hocam. Thank you. The next question comes from Başak Yavcan. She asks, thank you for this inspiring talk and discussion on sustainability. My question is about methodology, how to spot it, especially while doing field work and interviews. You ask what is in the minds of male, sorry, of, I have something here of the department, male department heads and corporation directors in their hiring decisions approach to management and gender issues. How should we ask about these to get candid answers?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of watching the behavior. Who do they hire in the name of gender diversity? And then what happens to that person? Are they ever really given authority in that field? So it's a combination of the interview, but also the long-term follow-up. That is, you always watch over time and try to see whether the token hire is allowed or enabled or even rewarded for doing the things supposedly they were hired for. So I think you have to the methodology is a longer attention span to watch not only the senior executives' rationale for doing this hiring, but then watch what happens to the person who's hired, how they're treated, whether they are acknowledged as authorities, whether they're rewarded for actually doing their job, or whether they're punished for not being part of the team. So that takes a double methodology. It's both the language used as including the person who's hired. Why do they think they were hired? What do they think was their special skills that got them hired? And then watch over time what happens to the senior executives' actually treatment of the new hire, but also how he or she is treated when they try to do their job. Takes a longer attention span, which I realize is hard because you don't have the funding. I mean, we're very realistic about research. It takes money and time, and sometimes you feel as though you don't want it. But if possible, hang in there for a while.
All right, thank you very much for your answer. Gülçin Hoca writes, thanks you for your speech. And she says she needs to leave to teach gender and sexuality course.
Oh, wonderful.
And that is as part of our migration studies MA, and we're happy indeed about this to have gender classes also in the migration MA program. Thank you. Also, Burcu Hoca has another question added. She thanks you for the wisdom you have shared, and she asks, can you please share the interview on the UN that you mentioned about sustainable patriarchy in the UN?
Yes, I'm going to send it to Zuhal as soon as we get off. And then, so all of you who are interested, it's a Nadine's interview is fair. And I think she may even reference a print article she wrote on it. She's very experienced. Anyway, I'm going to send the link to Zuhal. So get in touch with her, everybody who's interested. And let's say, give her 24 hours. After the conference is over, contact Suhal, and she by then will have Nadine's link.
All right. Thank you indeed. I would like to ask, do we have more questions from our guests here? Serdal Hoca, sorry, before her, Nazlı Belen. We have one more question, Nazlı Belen Alan. Thank you very much for this wonderful speech. After hearing about tomboys, do you think that raising maybe tom girls, in brackets, by feminist mothers could contribute to breaking the chains of a sustainable patriarchy?
It depends what we think of what a tomboy or tomgirl is. That is somebody who, as an 8-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 15-year-old, seems to be violating the norms in that society and in that culture in that society of what it means to be a girl, or what it means to be a boy. You know, boys who don't want to play football or don't want to play soccer or don't want to, you know, they want to read, and that's considered feminine. It depends what the society imagines. Do they imagine, oh, it's a phase? And if it's just a phase, this is also done with lesbians and gay men. Oh, it's just a phase, then a phase doesn't really upset patriarchy, right? If you can imagine it's a phase, which means you let the girl climb the trees until she's 18, and then you say, okay, this is a parent or an aunt or a grandmother saying, okay, you've had your fun. Now it's time to be a girl. Now it's time to put away your blue jeans, stop climbing trees, and learn how to be a proper girl, because otherwise you'll never get married. And that's also the nervousness of parents about the marriageability of girls, of daughters. And so that's one way for patriarchy to kind of cope with, without seeming to overtly resist the tomboy, is to claim it's a phase and then act on it as if it's just a phase. And that oftentimes can be people chastising the parent. Maybe a religious leader saying to the mother, well, you know, now's the time for Fatima to cut out that kind of silly boy behavior. And you as a mother won't be a good mother if you don't tell Fatima now is the time to stop, you know. So that's a long term, I mean, that's been going on. That's a long time patriarchal sustainability strategy, is to refer to it as a stage and also to treat it as a stage as a parent or people who chastise parents. Parents are under lots of pressures in every society, from neighbors, from older relatives, from religious leaders, and from the general, you know, elite, to end the phase. If the parent won't end the phase and say, no, this is who my daughter is, she's happiest when she's out playing football and she's out having adventures with her brothers, or then the parent is usually under a lot of pressure, and that's where resistance shows its head. And that you can see patriarchy thinks, okay, we've done the sustainability camouflage. Now out come the knives, if you will. Out comes the more explicit repression. And it's aimed not just at the girls, it's aimed at their parents. Right? So I think you can watch it, and it means that interviewing should be with parents, not only with the teenagers or the young girls, right? Because it's oftentimes the parents who get the first patriarchal pressure.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. We have one more question from Selda Tuncer. Welcome, Selda Hocam. Thank you so much for this illuminating and inspiring talk. I'd like to give an example in the academy about how this new restoration works for sustaining the patriarchy. Recently, admitting the inevitable significance of women's and gender issues, as well as it is a subject of promotion, anyone without any expertise has started to research on this issue, mostly related to the family context. As a result, the notion of gender is used as a variable, not a critical perspective. This serves as a legitimate tool for eliminating feminist scholarship, both in theory and practice.
That is so illuminating. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, this notion that gender analysis, and even more helpful feminist gender analysis, is something anybody can do, is insidious. Almost all of us have had to learn it. And it's taken a lot of time and people criticizing our work, I mean, in a friendly, helpful way, by saying, no, really, you needed to take that into account, or you didn't stay around long enough, or you should have looked at this factor as well. All of us had to learn it. When I look at my own earliest stuff, I mean, I did a lot of non-feminist stuff, never anti-feminist, but I did a lot of non-feminist stuff. But then my early feminist stuff, and thinking about all the people who taught me how to do it better, how to do it more reliably, how to do it more critically. And I think you're giving this point that people now think they can just start tap dancing with ever having studied tap dance, right? And it is part of sustainable patriarchy. It is to say that gender studies is not a skill. It is not an intellectual field. And that dilutes it and that undermines it. So every time we see anybody trying to pass off their unskilled, which means unserious, alleged gender studies, particularly masking it as family studies, we need to speak up, and not ad hominem, not necessarily towards the person's own ambition, although it may be pretty clear to you that it's being done for raw ambition, but rather here are things that the reader of this flawed study should be aware they should not do, and stick to the study, talk about what readers should take away as lessons of requiring more skill, more seriousness. And that can sometimes be a particularly effective strategy.
All right, thank you very much. One more question from Burcu Hoca. Could you comment on how you see the way the UN includes gender equality among sustainable development goals as co-opted? Does the UN talk the talk but not walk the walk on gender equality, is her question.
Yes, well, here's the thing to do, is to look at every economic development project. And some are much more effective and genuine in gender inclusion than others. Some give money but don't do any follow-up evaluations. Evaluations are part of the system of the UN. And I've learned this from friends of mine who have been under UN contracts. Always look at the evaluations. That is, when there's been a gender equality or gender inclusion economic development project. Don't just look at the project. Try and see how it was evaluated. They're always very formal evaluations. How are the evaluations done? Are they done kind of on the fly, that is briefly? Are they done by people who have gender analytical skills? Look at the evaluation process. is it serious? Is it genuine? Then look at what happens to the evaluation. Is it shelved? Is it used to refine the next economic, gender inclusive project? What happens to the evaluation? The evaluation might be quite serious, but what happens to it? I had a friend who just did an evaluation and she's a very serious feminist, a very skilled and experienced feminist. And she did an evaluation of gender development in a particular Middle Eastern country, a country fraught with war. And it was the evaluation, she did a very serious evaluation. It was never published. It was never made public for other people to use it, learn from it. So the evaluation was serious. It was then put on the shelf. And partly it was put on the shelf because, thanks to her interviews, she named some of the major donors who weren't following through. And the United Nations is, because the United Nations is always hat in hand. They are always beggars. One thinks of the United Nations as very powerful. It is always on the street corner with their hat out asking for donations. So agencies within the United Nations are very, very, very reluctant to name any donor country as culpable. And so the report, which was very serious evaluation, this is doing studies of evaluations. Who does them? How do they do it? What's the result? And then what happens to them, as a way to study walking the walk versus talking the talk. By the way, it's hard to do because it's hard to get hold of the evaluations. But if you start with an evaluation that is about to happen, that gives you a better chance to walk all the way through. Are they told to do it in a weekend? Are they told to do it just from paper documents, but no interviews? Are they told just to interview the heads of the project, not the people who are supposed to benefit from the project?
Yes. Burcu Hoca has added a question connected with your answer. She asks, can you please share this interview as well? And how can we find the evaluations if they are not published? So if they doesn't publish them?
I can't, because I promised I wouldn't tell. That's part of the problem. And I'm not withholding the name of the evaluation or the name of the evaluator or even the name of the agency. I'm not withholding it to support this kind of window dressing. I'm withholding it so that this feminist evaluator gets asked to do more evaluations. But it is, but you've caught me. I'm being complicit here in the sense of, well, in sense of protection. So that's why try to kind of have a network of people who do evaluation contracts. Find one person who, there are hundreds of them, because every UN agency has to have evaluations. So watch, the UNDP, watch the various agencies that have to do evaluations, and see if you can begin to interview evaluators, people who've had contracts to do evaluations. And my guess is you'll hear a lot of stories, and you'll have to protect them and not use their names, my guess is. But you'll hear a lot of stories of how their evaluations were always so underfunded, they couldn't really talk to the people who were supposed to benefit, and or they wrote as critical an evaluation as they could, but they know it was shelved.
All right. Um, yes, this is really sad, but true. So we live with this reality, but you also show us ways how to proceed, how to finally come to ways to get that information also. I would like to ask once more, do we have any more questions from our guests?
Thank you all for joining in. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And I continue to learn from Turkish feminists.
That is so lovely of you indeed. Thank you very much. Maybe we can end your speech with a metaphor that you use and that I love so much. Namely, instead of saying international relations and the world is a chessboard, you say it is a dancing floor with so many different music being played and so many different dancers. Some are allowed to dance, some can just watch the dancers, some stay out in the cold. I love that metaphor of yours. Can we hear this once more from you?
Well, I want us to know that what we study is not rigid.
Mm.
It's fluid. And that's why feminists are smarter than anybody else, because it takes skills to watch not only the dance floor, but who's dancing to the music out in the street by hearing the music through the window. And I mean, I really do believe this. I was a non-feminist. I was never anti-feminist. I was non-feminist for a long time. And now I realize, gosh, I didn't get anything. I was so unrealistic, right? And I think watching the dance floor and seeing all the people on the dance floor, including the cleaners afterwards who clean up the dance floor, makes us so much more realistic. And that's what it means to do feminist gender analysis.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Selda Hoca. Also, thanks you. It was great to see and listen to you, Cynthia, she says. Yes, I also want to share my heart. Thank you so much. Can we take a photo also with all of
Oh,
us?
sure. Sure. That would be fun.
Tuğçe. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you. Keep having a great conversation.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Take care and hope to see you in Ankara again.
That's a great idea.
We will always invite you. We will always be happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank
Take care.
you. And you're, you know, I'm in your debt. So I'm happily in your debt. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care now.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Yes, that was so wonderful indeed. Thank you also for all the great questions that came from you. I now would like to hand over to Birgül Hocam to begin the first round for the special section. The first round with the first 3 articles. Birgül Hocam, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuhal Hocam, for your great moderation. Now, without losing time, we can continue with the presentations of the papers. In this special section, there are 6 very interesting original articles, and we will have 2 panels to have our authors summarizing their articles. And in the first round, and by the way, I will try to share the contents of the special section with you. Just now I cannot find it. Okay, I will try it once again. Yes, here it is. Yeah, that is the special section, the current section, the current issue of the Turkish Studies. And in this first panel, we have 3 speakers, we have 3 papers, but 4 colleagues. First, we have Bezan Hocam to present her paper on the retrospective study of patriarchy in Turkish politics. And then we have Marilla Hoca's paper on the contestation of the global norm against violence against women in Turkey. Unfortunately, Marilla Hoca has a health issue, and I will be presenting her paper. I will be sharing her work with you. And third speakers are Melisa Gündüz and Funda Gençoğlu, and their paper is about distant women's organization as a counter-hegemonic actor in Turkey. Each presenter will have about 15 minutes, and then after that, after the first round, we will have Q&A session as well. Thank you so much, and Bezan Hocam, can you continue with your paper? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll be brief, than 15 minutes, I guess. So when I was thinking about what to present today after wonderful Cynthia Enloe, so I thought that as scholars, we are expected to produce scientific papers, yes, because of the publish or perish thing, but that doesn't mean that we only produce dry accounts of what we observe. In many cases, our books, chapters, article reflects our lives, our status, and our identities. So, and every paper, every article or special section, special issue has its own story behind. So the story of this selection of papers, actually, including my paper, began with Cynthia's visit to our university in 2019, a couple of months before the pandemic. So Cynthia's speech was a true inspiration for all of us to come together and write all these articles, actually, and think about and write about the patriarchy in Turkish politics. So our discussions and meetings over Zoom actually help us to live through the difficult times of the pandemic. So today I'm really happy to introduce at least parts of the papers and products of these laborious efforts of around, I think, 10 or more than 10 women scholars. I'm honored to share the same platform with Cynthia to present my paper. So what my article is about, I followed Cynthia's advice with this study, and I aim to understand and expose the ideas and relationships that help the reproduction of patriarchy in Turkish politics through the life stories of female political party leaders. Despite the problematic nature of their encounters with patriarchy, I believe all the women who engage in Turkish politics, particularly these 4 women, help us to understand the ways to expose patriarchal structures in Turkey. For the list of women party leaders' encounters with the politically embedded patriarchy, I employed the concept of political masculinities, and I conducted a retrospective study, use information about their life stories, the experiences and public statements of the female political party leaders. I choose these women party leaders to be represent 4 consecutive periods in Turkish politics. I start with Nezihe Muhittin for the early Republican period, Behice Boran for the multi-party period, Tansu Çiller for the post-1980 military coup period, and Meral Akşener is more new, the AKP period. So as they were able to climb the higher ranks of politics, life stories of these women are invaluable to trace the bargains they have made to resist, accommodate, adapt, or conflict with men over resources, rights, and political sources. So start with Nezihe Muhittin. She was an intellectual who lived through the turbulent times of Turkey's transition from Ottoman Empire to the Republic. She was one of the leading figures of the women's movement in Turkey. She initiated the establishment of Women's People Party on June 15, 1923, even before the Republic was announced. The Women's People Party was never materialized since the Kemalist male elite set, as Cynthia's words, set her later, not now. So after the foundation of the Turkish Republic, women's emancipation was considered within the framework of nation-state building. So yet the voice of women like Muhittin, who demanded political rights and representation of Turkish women, were toned down. During the early Republican period, the patriarchal framework was reflected the idealization of womanhood in terms of wifehood and national motherhood. In the nation-state building process, women were assigned and performed the role of bearers of the future generations as mothers and teachers, and they were expected to remain passive subjects of politics whose rights were given by men. With her progressive ideas and her stance against men's domination in Turkish politics, Muhittin didn't perform in accordance with the rules. As a result, she was perceived as a threat to hierarchical gender relations in politics and imposition of masculine power over newly established political institutions. She was ridiculed and her activism was undermined by the male politicians. So the Kemalist male elite wanted to decide the time and the context of the political rights that would be given to women. Muhittin and the Women's People Party were considered intruders to the women's emancipation project of the founding fathers of the Turkish nation. Muhittin case is one of the earliest cases of Turkish political masculinities that are defined by domination and attestation of manliness. The second name I dealt with, Behçe Boran. She was the General Secretary of the Turkish Workers' Party, Türkiye İşçi Partisi. As a Marxist sociologist, Boran joined the Communist Party first. After the May 2027 military coup, she joined the Turkish Workers' Party, and she was elected as the chairperson of the party. Because of the intra-party divisions, she left the party and established a new party called Workers' Party in 1975. She has a long story of political life, but to make it short, during her political career, she encountered all sorts of repression mechanisms and domination attempts because of her ideology as well as her gender. She challenged the patriarchy that is embedded in politics and society as a woman and as a leftist. She was a socialist ideologue and politician who actually dedicated her life to the struggle against fascism and patriarchy. On the other hand, Boran's uncompromising attitude in politics was perceived as masculine. To be able to make a respectable place within the Turkish leftist movement of the time, she claimed the political masculinities. As political masculinities are about instances where power is being reproduced or challenged, Boran's dedication was considered a solid challenge for the Kemalist, nationalist, and socialist establishment of the time, as the patriarchal structures are established to ensure the subordination of women. The old guard of political patriarchs did everything in their power to push Boran out of politics. Tansu Çiller, the third case in my paper, she was an economist, politician, and 22nd Prime Minister of Turkey. She was the first and only female Prime Minister in Turkish political history. In 1993, after Süleyman Demirel, the leader of the Trupat Party, was elected president, he nominated Çiller as his successor for the party leadership. She was elected as a chairperson in the Extraordinary General Assembly of the party, and she became prime minister. When she came to office, she attracted great publicity as Turkey's first female prime minister. However, the period of her prime ministership was associated with increased terrorism and violence. Furthermore, a political scandal known as the Susurluk incident was the most definitive event of the period. So Susurluk incident triggered a series of revelations regarding the state-sponsored deep state. These scandals and corruption allegations led to a decline in her popularity, and she lost party leadership after a defeat in 2002 elections. From the very beginning of her career, actually, Chilar was a case of opportunistic and pragmatist leader. While she appeared as a strong challenger to the masculinized politics of Turgut Özal and his entourage in the Motherland Party, she played with the rules of patriarchy. In fact, she made her place in the masculine political sphere by using her femininity and then masculinized herself. In every public meeting, initially, she stated her speeches by saying, "I'm your mother, I'm your sister of the nation." On the other hand, she was promoted by the media as beautiful woman among old male politicians in Turkey. Her looks, her fashion style, her colorful scarf become popular subject of the media. However, after becoming prime minister, she declared that she wouldn't follow a political path different from her male counterparts. Her body language swiftly masculinized. She often pounded her hand on the table when talking. She started to use masculinized statements such as "we act, we break, we demolish." Chiller successfully fit in the traditional masculine coding of leadership, adopted political masculinities to legitimize her leadership position. She chose to engage politics according to the rules set by men. By doing so, she reproduced political masculinities. The last name I will analyze in the paper, Meral Akşener. She is a right-wing national politician, all we know. She's the founder and chairperson of the E-Party. But her political career is get back to 1990s, similarly same time with Chilar. In 1994, she quit her job at the university and joined the True Path Party. She briefly worked with Chilar as her cabinet's interior minister for 6 months, replacing Mehmet Ağar, who resigned after Susurluk incident. Her time in government coincided with an array of political violence as well as a so-called postmodern coup of 28 February 1997. In 2001, she resigned from True Path Party, participated in the establishment of the Justice and Development Party, but in a short time, she left Justice and Development Party and joined MHP when Devlet Bahçeli rebranded the party. In short time, she had become a popular political figure with her harsh but conciliatory attitude in the General Assembly. After unsuccessfully challenging Bahçeli for the MHP leadership, she quit the party in 2016 and founded the E-Party on October 2017. She came a long way to be considered as a contender by the patriarchs of Turkish politics. Her political story started as being one of the Demirel's daughters, like Çiller, in the True Path Party. Her bargain with the patriarchy continues when she joined the MHP. What makes her challenger to the patriarchal culture and patriarchal masculinities of Turkish politics is her choice to leave her stronghold home, which is headed by old guard male politicians. As an experienced politician who knows many of the tricks of masculine politics, Akşener actually made her path as a challenger in Turkish politics, despite the verbal and physical attacks targeting her and her family. However, she couldn't escape from reproducing political masculinities. In reaction to masculine attacks to her womanhood and her leadership capacity as a woman, Akşener has often used masculinist discourse. To conclude, all the four women have different experiences with the politically embedded patriarchy, and they encountered with political masculinities. They employed different strategies to survive in politics, and obviously the nature of their challenge to patriarchy was very different. In this context, the price Akşener is paying has been in the form of public defamations, while Boran faced state-inflicted violence, and Muhyiddin became the target of discreditation campaign. So thank you for listening to me. Hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vezan Hocam, for presenting your paper. It is quite interesting, to talk about female party leaders in Turkey from the perspective of sustainable patriarchy. And let me just present the paper by Marella Bodur-Ün. And Marella Hoca has also a PowerPoint presentation. Just a second. I have a presentation here, and then yes, it's here. I hope you can see the presentation. Marella Hoca's paper is on contestation of the global norm against violence against women in Turkey. This paper is about the diverse ways in which civil societal actors in Turkey have engaged with the global norm on violence against women. That is an important global norm, violence against women. I mean, the norm on violence against women. But in fact, so many civil societal actors in Turkey have been interpreting this norm in a different way. And despite the adoption of legislation at the national level to combat the violence against women, I mean, again, it persists globally as well as in Turkey at the national level as well. And Marella Hoca also uses the concept by Professor Enloe. Patriarchy is a dynamic system and it has been able to sustain itself. And this paper brings together insights from different norm research in the discipline of international relations and feminist scholarship as well. It mainly builds on the critical constructive scholarship on norm contestation and resistance. And this concept refers to the agency of different actors in localizing, translating, and resisting global norms. And in fact, many gender and politics scholars have also underlined the role that local actors play in translating global gender equality norms as well. And norm contestation refers to the conflict and deliberations around the meanings, validity, and application of norms. Because of time limitation, I will try to kind of shorten the presentation. If you have any questions in the Q&A session, I will do my best to answer your questions with regard to that paper as well. And I have the opportunity to read this paper also a few times in the process of preparing this special section. In the Turkish context, there are three different responses to the anti-violence against women norm in Turkey. The first response is norm adoption. This approach is mainly accepted by independent women's organizations and feminist activists as well. They advance this norm in line with international and regional conventions. And they accept these conventions and they think the best should be done to implement the anti-violence against violence norm in Turkey. The second approach can be labeled as norm contestation. It is mainly adopted by pro-government conservative women's organizations like KADEM. They contest this norm and they adopt a kind of gender-neutral perspective. And the third approach is norm rejection. It is adopted by radical conservative actors. They totally reject the anti-violence against women norm, and they think that it is kind of an alien element. It's an alien threat to Islamic values and norms of the Turkish society, a concept that we hear quite frequently in the Turkish context. The first category of civil society organizations. They adopt this norm, and Marella Hoca labels them as independent women's organizations and feminist non-governmental organizations as well. She argues that these are the key actors in the local reception of anti-violence against women norm, and they push the government. They do their best to push the government to adopt legislation addressing these norms, and they successfully used the global and European gender equality frameworks, and it is their reference point in their advocacy of women's rights. And they cooperated with state institutions throughout the negotiation process of Istanbul Convention and its ratification as well. And they established organizations that pressured the government to adopt legislation, to adopt relevant legislation. And she has given the examples of Purple Roof Women's Shelter Foundation in Istanbul, as well as Kamer. And the second group of NGOs, Non-Contestation Pro-Government Women's Organization. While the women's movement in Turkey has made many important breakthroughs in the fight for gender equality, the Republican mode of patriarchy adapted itself in the 2000s. And the projects of neoliberalism, conservatism, authoritarianism, and nationalism in Turkey have brought in a kind of a new mode of patriarchy. She labels it as the neoliberal and conservative patriarchy. And they have been attempting to re-entrench patriarchy through dismantling gender equality legislation, adopting a family-centered social policy agenda, and they try to remove the terms gender equality from official norms, from official documents and action plans. And these organizations, as in the example of Kadem, they articulate a new narrative, and this new narrative also produces some new concepts. An important concept in that regard is gender justice. They bent the meaning of the term gender to refer to fixed social roles and biological differences between males and females. And with regard to violence, Kadem has adopted a kind of a gender-neutral focus. And they don't think that it is a problem, especially against women. It's a kind of a general problem. And Kadem thinks that the family unity should be respected. And this organization views women as dependent individuals, and they need to be protected. And Kadem expects men to realize their mistakes and repent, stating implicitly that violence against women is a kind of sin, and they interpret it from a religious perspective. But that is important. They supported the Istanbul Convention and existing legislation to combat violence against women. And the third group of NGOs, those are radical conservative actors, and they totally reject these norms. They think that gender equality norms, they are Western, and they are alien, and they are anti-Islamic, and they try to undermine traditional God-given gender roles and identities. And they think that if we support gender equality or gender justice, that would legitimize, LGBTQI identities, and they normalize. These concepts just normalize same-sex unions and bring the end of the so-called sacred family, and ultimately resulting in societal breakdown. And they supported Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention. And they think that still the withdrawal from the convention is not enough, and they call on the government, they push the government to dismantle the existing gender equality legislation as well. And there is a quotation from one of the proponents of this opinion, Sema Maraşlı. She states that Istanbul Convention is a sexist, fascist, and divisive convention prepared with the premise that all men are aggressive and women are victims. It is the convention of the wall of the sexes. And in that article, 3 different responses to the diffusion of the gender equality norm has been discussed: adoption, contestation, and rejection. And in conclusion, we can say that this study highlighted the normative agency of local recipients of global norms. Local actors are important, and they are also important in the domestic normative framework that condition local responses to global norm diffusion. And second contribution of the article is that it pointed to the plurality of local responses. There is not just one local response, there are different local responses to these global norms. Third, this study made a case-based contribution to the recent norm research and to the literature on gender and politics by exploring the normative contestation over this norm in Turkey, in a Muslim majority country, over the past 3 decades. And this analysis has revealed that this global norm faces significant resistance in local contexts. And the Turkish case is an important case study in that respect. And the transformative content of this norm can be lost in the process of the norm's translation into national context. Or as the Turkish case reveals, the norm's transformative content might lead to states' non-compliance with this norm. And these are the email addresses of Marella Hoca. If you want to contact her with regard to her article, you are more than welcome to do that. And I hope I could have presented Marella Hoca's paper in a good way. I wish she could have been with us, but unfortunately she couldn't. And let me just stop the PowerPoint presentation, sharing the PowerPoint presentation, and now we will have a paper by Melissa and Funda Hoca, again with regard to women NGOs from a different perspective. Melissa, Funda Hocam, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for this presentation for our professors and hocalarım. Thank you. Our paper, this is Women's Organization as a Counter-Hegemonic Actor in Turkey, was basically shaped by the question of could the Turkish women's movement, which has a strong reaction mechanism, be a constituent actor of counter-hegemony. We try to understand if a counter-hegemony is to be established in Turkey, the dissident women's movement's perspective on a potential articulation and the role it assigns to itself in such an articulation. This question is flourished upon the theoretical foundations of what Chantal Mouffe and Ernest de Laclau call radical democracy or agonistic democracy, which are shaped around the concept of hegemony. So why did we choose the dissident organized women's movement? 3 factors were decisive in our choice. The first is that the women's movement in Turkey is well organized, deep-rooted, and old. The second is they act by fusing theory and practice and like feeding off each other. The third one is the internalization of the principle of intersectionality from the beginning, the first way, which recognized multiple practice of marginalization and exclusion in the political sphere. Before presenting the findings, I would like to briefly talk about the study group, data collection and analysis. Why did we choose these 8 women's organizations particular? They were dissident and against the existing power, in other words, hegemony. In addition, they all defined themselves as a feminist. They were in same collective identity that the hegemon had marginalized for a while, and they were in different fields of activity, which we considered important to turn them into a potential for articulation. We also wanted them to be small and large organizations that organized to two big cities, Ankara and Istanbul, and they carried this organizational behavior to other cities and grave solidarity there as well, the small cities. So in addition to conducting semi-structured interviews with 8 different women's organizations, we analyzed their written and recorded documents in areas such as social media, websites with critical discourse analysis. So we have identified 4 criteria based on our theoretical framework to put it more clearly. First one is how they analyze the hegemony. The most prominent point was the existing power was intertwined with patriarchy with different levels. And they believed that the definition and appearance of patriarchy changed from time to time as society and political relations change. So it's sustainable. That's why we called existing power is a neoliberal, religious, conservative patriarchy, because it includes all of them and more. Second criteria is how they construct the discourse of us and them. The common point was that there are those who try to marginalize feminists and make solidarity dysfunctional, and there are feminists who fight against this. Third criteria was do they avoid the moralization of politics? In other words, are their perspectives agonistic or antagonistic? As the actor of a feminist movement that is being marginalized, stigmatized, and even criminalized in the atmosphere created by the government, they say that you cannot have good feelings towards someone who sees you as an enemy and confronts you. That summarized this criteria as well. The fourth one is are they open to cooperation or solidarity with the institutional politics? They had reservations about turning into the women's branch of any party and kept their distance. However, for the solidarity, they stated that they were open to cooperation at the level of training, consciousness raising, and experience sharing. As a result, the data we have obtained that the dissident women's organization meet these criteria has given us strong evidence that they can be potential founding actors of counter-hegemony within the scope of the study. But since we collected the data in 2019, a lot of has changed politically and socially in Turkey and the world. The pandemic was a difficult period for all social movements, and the economic crisis and natural disasters may have caused a variation in the issues that the women's struggle focused on. The government's aggressive policy against the women's struggle has become increasingly harsh. Feminists have started to lose their gains of the struggle, like Istanbul Convention. The data of this study does not cover these recent developments. It does not include an analysis for the reaction mechanism that emerged as a result. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. Funda Hocam, would you continue, or Melissa, did you present the whole paper, or?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for all the presentations. And now we can continue with the Q&A session. Do you have any questions to our presenters, Bezen Hoca, for Marina Hoca's paper and Melisa Funda Hoca's paper as well? Let me abuse my role as the moderator and ask a question to Bezen Hoca. Bezen Hocam, after your paper, after your research has finished, after your paper has been published, there are also so many events taking place in Turkish politics, including female political leaders as well. And Tansu Çiller was, from time to time, still on the media. She had either some explanations, some discourses, and Meral Akşener is again in the headlines quite often. And how do you perceive the latest developments in Turkish politics from your perspective? Female political leaders, female Turkish politicians, and sustainable patriarchy on the other hand, especially with regard to Meral Akşener and Tansu Çiller.
Yeah, Tansu Çiller is back.
Exactly.
There are many developments after I finished the paper, particularly about the stance of E-Party and Meral Akşener. And now she is more assertive in terms of her leadership and also her party, particularly given their position in the coming local elections. The thing is that Meral Akşener is doing the same thing what she is doing in terms of she is a contender, but she's not challenging the patriarchal structures. They are playing with their rules. The discourse is the same. At some point, she saw some softness. I think in some of her speeches, she cried while she was reading a poem or something like this. But this moments of weakness, just very short moments of weakness, and then she make herself, and then she again play the main contenders of the whole, the other party leaders. And unfortunately, the Turkish politics, it's not just patriarchal, but it's also very dirty place to be part of it. So, and I think Meral Akşener is playing her role very perfectly in this place. She is one of the most experienced leaders among the party leaders. Even her experience in politics is longer than Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, for example. Even maybe the Recep Erdoğan, maybe Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, they are from the same time because he was the mayor of Istanbul at that time. So she's one of the oldest and most experienced politicians in Turkish politics right now, and she knows what to do, and she's playing the rules of patriarchal old guards, and now she's one of the old guards, even though she is the female version of old guards. I cannot say anything about the Tansu Çiller because her appearance is kind of when it's practical for the governing party, so they bring Tansu Çiller, but it's a very short-lived appearance of the Tansu Çiller in today's politics.
Thank you so much. Do you have any other questions, any other comment with regard to those papers? I think there is no question. And then Zuhal Hocam, may I hand it over to you, and then we can continue with the second one.
All right. Thank you very much, Birgül Hocam, for the great moderation, and thank you for all the wonderful presentations. Indeed. Let's then continue with the second round with the remaining three articles. So we will begin with Gülriz Hoca and Başak Hoca, who will be talking about gender radicalization and patriarchy in Turkey, an analysis of women's motivations and constraints when confronted with ISIS and the Al-Nusra Front. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Zuhal Hocam. Let me share our presentation first. I hope you all see it. Okay, first of all, thanks a lot again for compiling this very special section and launching this with the participation of one and only Cynthia Enloe. I'm very happy to be a part of this brilliant lineup of scholars, and it's a good, very nice occasion to be here with you today. And thanks for those who stayed with us. As you know, introduced, we appear with my colleague Başak Yavçan on this special section with our article on gender radicalization and patriarchy in Turkey. And with this research, our aim was locating Turkey in discussions of gender and violent extremism. So there have been already studies on violent extremism and Turkey, especially in the context of Turkey and ISIS, Turkey and Al-Nusra, but we don't really find much about the interaction between gender and violent extremism in case of Turkey. And while doing so, one of our aims was identifying the structural motivators, individual intensives, and enabling factors in women's radicalization in Turkey. We wanted to assess women's various roles in this process, not only as sympathizers, recruiters, but also perpetrators as well as victims. Plus, a significant dimension to our research was analyzing women's roles in fighting against radicalization as preventers. So obviously, we were discussing this in the context of sustainable patriarchy, and because our assessment of women's involvement in religiously motivated violent extremism cuts across family as a realm of private patriarchy, religiosity as a very strong correlate of patriarchy in Turkey and elsewhere, and sustainable patriarchy in the public sphere. So this brings in many layers and many roles for women for and against radicalization. So our conceptual framework explores gender and terrorism nexus beyond, identifications of women's terrorism. And even though we find greater number of studies which explores women's relationship with violence in the context of terrorism, it is still, it doesn't really pay enough adequate attention to the political context. I mean, it rather romanticizes or homogenizes women's experiences. So we wanted to follow a more political perspective on this as well. And usually, as Bloom and Lokmanoğlu also asserts, women have always been identified as victims or pawns of terrorist organizations, but they're also the perpetrators of terrorism. Plus, we wanted to transcend this push-pull dichotomy, which is quite prevalent in analysis, by incorporating the enabling factors. So we wanted to understand the context, the enabling factors, which really translate different set of, indicators and drivers to women's acts of engaging with violent extremism. And as I mentioned, obviously, sustainable patriarchy, which was proposed by Cynthia, very much informed and inspired our analysis. Here, I would leave the floor to my colleague Başak to talk about our methodology, which is based on extensive field research. And then once she finishes, I'll take up the floor once again to talk about our major findings and discussions. Başak Hocam.
Thank you, Gülriz Hocam, and thank you again. Let me also thank everyone for organizing this event, and also it was a great pleasure to be this special issue. It's great to see you all here, even though it's virtually, and greetings from Brussels. In terms of the methodology part of our article, so the fieldwork and the output reports cited in this article are parts of a larger project called Improving Effectiveness of Measures to Tackle the Foreign Terrorist Fighters and Radicalization Threat, I Care for All project. And that's why it has been launched a very big, extensive field research, which doesn't only address the issues discussed in this article, but also the role of NGOs in countering radicalism, countering and preventing radicalization processes. So all in all, the field work was conducted between September 2018 and January 2019 across the provinces listed in table 2, and it was an ambitious field work, and we got to interview many academics, researchers, journalists, women NGOs, refugee humanitarian NGOs, especially those who deal with integration and protection of Syrian refugees, faith-based NGOs, legal assistants, bar members, bar associations, experts from state institutions, members of the community, political party affiliates, clerics and religious leaders. And we have actually visited some faith I don't know if they should be called faith-based NGOs. Yurizacığım, help me out here. Some residences of of religious groups, let's put it this way, because they also take an important claim to take an important role in this process. And despite, of course, the ambitious field work methodology, there were also some constraints that relate to the very topic of the research, dealing with radicalization, the understanding of radicalization, even starting the conversation, inviting interviewees with the short notes that this is something on radicalization, guaranteed a lot of immediate no answers, a lot of rejections to us. So our existing field connections, but also new ones, and a snowball sample really helped us in this path. And there were many cases that I still talk about when talking about the difficulties of field work that came up during this process. One of the, for instance, women that we were directed to without much detail, but as someone who has some information to share with us. With this woman, we had an interview for 1 hour, and at that point, Beruzoja and I were like, okay, she doesn't know nothing, and this is not going anywhere, maybe we should wrap up. And just towards the end of the interview, as we were getting ready to thank her, she started telling us about her 2 sons who were in the process of being recruited to ISIS, and how she prevented that from happening in collaboration with the community leaders, in collaboration with her family, which is what exactly we wanted to see and hear about. So even though she wasn't someone who had the experience of joining ISIS, it was still difficult to get that out of her. Just a moment. As a result of this process, we actually, as Gülriz Hocam has indicated, we were interested in the multiple roles women can assume, and we also, as a response to the literature, which saw women more as victims or joining along the husbands. Which did not give much agency to women. And this approach actually resulted in a wider perspective, which allowed us to incorporate different theoretical approaches. And usually the literature on push and the evaluating push and pull factors in relation to radicalization dwells on the role of economic and structural factors almost exclusively. The follow-up factors play a minor role for a lot of times. But when women were factored into the equation, we got actually a multiplicity of these factors being at play. And we also approach this, again, based on the literature, not just the in terms of push and pull factors, but also enabling factors that jointly operate, make it easy for these push and pull factors to operate, such as recruitment techniques or a general atmosphere of violence or political polarization within the society. When we look at, maybe I should move without losing much time to findings and discussions. The findings actually also underline economic and structural factors. Yes, indeed, they are important and they're not to be ignored. But they were interestingly at play in a different way. So when we look at men and how they join these organizations, usually also in the interviews, this was raised a lot. That there is a lot of talk on how much they get paid, what are the conditions, the structural conditions, how much they're getting paid. So it's a lot. So the pull factor, so to say, of getting income, generating additional income, really plays an important role. In the case of women, it is deprivation from existing protection, economic protection of a family seem to play a more important role than just generating more income through joining ISIS, in particular, or Nusra Front in this Islamic radicalization case. For instance, there were examples that were brought up where women were actually talking about their inability to react to the fact that their husbands were leaving, and even though they didn't want to leave, they were afraid that they would be married to someone else, as is the case in many of the ISIS recruits, and then they would be abandoned if they had stayed in Turkey with their kids. So that was sometimes a reason for joining. Of course, though this more passive role, kind of a semi-victim role, is not the only role played by women. In a lot of cases were brought to us by both male and female interviewees on women's on ideological factors. This is really within the within the Islamic teachings of ISIS, where women do find a place for themselves to service Islam, to bring more meaning to their lives by being part of the land, joining the jihad and their own way of jihad. And this is also important to note because somewhat overlooked. And we have been told also some cases where male members of the family were not interested in joining, but they were persuaded by female members of the family to join based on these ideological grounds, which we thought were also interesting. Along with in parallel with the ideological grounds, we found also some psychological factors making an important entry in this decision making. The quest to become respected as a warrior for Islam, or as a mother or wife of an Islamic hero, searching some self-worth, meaning in life. All of these were amplifying factors. So this, in some cases, also they are part of overlapping some vindictive feelings of taking revenge for the past behavior of an unjust state, for instance, were also brought up as part of these psychological factors. In the case of some Syrian refugees that we interviewed, it was also the unjustness that was taking place in Syria as part of Assad's regime, and how they found ISIS as a strong power at the time, fighting against Assad as a potential ally to undo this unjustness. So here you see both the ideology and psychological factors at play, because that is something that makes them feel empowered, and this makes them feel better about themselves, both in terms of self-esteem, but also in terms of this more important role in life. Which brings us to enabling factors. A lot of these structural factors and ideological factors were mitigated or mediated through these enabling factors. One is the aggressive and convincing recruitment techniques of violent extremist organizations. And a lot of times we were told that once they are ahead in the recruitment process, actually it is really difficult to discourage and to make the potential recruit to change mind, and once it's beyond the sympathizer stage, it's really difficult to take it back. The impact of theological training in traditional mainstream Islam, or lack thereof, both came up in the interviews as an enabling factor. What do we mean by that? In some cases, it was lack of training that led to this blind submission to the teachings of ISIS and to the promises of ISIS. And in some cases, it was some training of Islam which was not found to be sufficient in answering the questions or in seeing a just state where it is not the land of Islam at all. So even when the teaching was not radical enough, so to say, even if it was too mainstream, even when it was too mainstream, it did promote this process. And a lot of times, the potential recruitees would look for answers within their circles of more mainstream Islam, and they would not find sufficient answers to the questions that they were told to ask. And that was also something that pushed them further. They couldn't find answers. For instance, one interview said the male members of our family who joined ISIS could not find answers to their questions from the imams in mosques. They either did not know religion well or were not interested in guiding them in the right direction. So in many of these cases, there was some, in terms of these enabling factors, especially when women and their ideological commitment was involved, there was some underpinnings of Salafism in their families as well. The polarization of society and politics was another factor that also played a role in multiple ways, actually. In the case of the idea of the understanding of violence as a predominant value in the society was something that came up a lot in many of these interviews. In a lot of places where there were multiple ethnic groups, religious groups living in certain areas, the language of violence was so widespread that and accepted that it didn't sound that radical to join these institutions. And a lot of, if one person did not join one group, it would join the other group. So and there would be some, so the person could choose from different groups. We have also heard of other terrorist groups being mentioned in this. In these interviews. Women also get affected by such polarization and ensuing violence, which implies further militarization of society and rising masculinity in the private sphere. So in the end, we did find a lot of, or Gürüz Hocam, should I leave the wrapping up part to you maybe, and how we relate all of this women's fight against radicalization in Turkey to patriarchy, and where they are limited, where they are active, in what roles?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Başak Hocam. So let me continue with how this relates with patriarchy, as Başak Hocam mentioned. Overall, our field findings suggest and actually refute that, women are not passive, and, this process is not only husband-centered. So women also, especially urban educated women who have very strong ideological motivations and convictions, actually they drive their families to join ISIS. So we have seen these cases. And also our research, likewise, other studies in the MENA and in different parts of the world who actually probe how and why women join, religiously motivated violent extremism like ISIS. Our research also confirms that women take up different roles. They are sympathizers, they are recruiters, especially through social media. They are perpetrators as well. Obviously, we have seen victimizations of women, especially in the Yazidi women's case, and they can also be possible preventers. So we would like to talk more on this, the role of patriarchy and its constraints on women's preventive roles as some final notes. But related with the structural factors, obviously we should note that women without independent income, they feel obliged to follow their husbands against their will to stay. Plus, traveling with their, male family members, it also fulfilled this patriarchal expectations of subservience. So they're actually in the family dynamics, patriarchy comes up very strongly in terms of, economic issues, in terms of women following their husbands, brothers, and sons. So especially our article draws on how patriarchy is a challenge against women's countering and preventive roles. And in that case, this motherhood and mothers, predominantly came up. So there are a few issues to be mentioned here. Although, mothers are first to detect the signs of radicalization in their family, as one interviewee told us, they're not powerful enough and they are restrained by patriarchy to stop the process. So this actually shows how, patriarchy works against women's preventive roles. Plus, women are also seen, this culture of patriarchy also tells us that, women are docile, they are vulnerable, they have no understanding of man's noble pursuit of war. It's a man's world, what would women know about it? So this actually works against women's preventive roles. Plus, the issue on motherhood is also very problematic because this heavy emphasis on women's preventive roles as mothers, but no mention of their, other public or institutional roles, actually it also manifests patriarchy. So this is problematic, and we also problematize this in our article. So as I come to the conclusion, I would like to underline a number of aspects regarding, how to strategize and how to gender CV and PV, I mean, countering and preventing violent extremism. So this issue very much carries the danger of instrumentalizing women's counter-radicalization roles. So women should be empowered for the sake of women. And there is a necessity of genuine empowerment of women so that, they would have all the means to play their countering and preventive roles. Plus, women should be empowered because this also helps them to fight, motivations to radicalize them. So they should be empowered against their own radicalization too. In this context, as mentioned by other studies too, civil society matters a lot, and empowering the civil society is also should be a major goal, particularly women's NGOs. And by the way, as we visited many women's NGOs in the field, very established and very prominent NGOs, they didn't have this radicalization outlook. They were very busy, obviously, with femicides, increasing violence against women. But they now, through our interviews, they also came to the conclusion that women's relationship with violence, in terms of radicalization, should also be acknowledged, and there must be a perspective to be developed. But obviously, we need a gender-sensitive outlook to radicalization, and how this is possible is through gender-sensitive sensitive research, participation and leadership of women and women's organizations in developing these strategies. So as I finish, we should be aware of the stunningly sustainable characteristics of patriarchy, as Cynthia Enloe, warns us. And this is not only, private patriarchy, but also public patriarchy. So we see this, deep-seated subordination of women. And if we want to achieve a genuine and an effective CV&PV strategy, we should start from empowering women and taking them as actors without seeing them only as, victims, but also empowering them as agents, as equal, members of the society. So thank you a lot. Thanks a lot for your attention. We'll be happy to collect the questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Girish Hocam and Başak Hocam. Very important indeed also your final words on not only victimization, but also seeing the agency of women and the power they may have. Thank you very much. Our next speech will be by Feyda Sayan Cengiz. She will be talking about Make Masculinity Great Again, Politics of Marriage and New Conservatism in Turkey's Islamic-Oriented Self-Help Discourse. The stage is yours, Feyda Hocam.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Zuhal Hocam, Birgül Hocam, for this organization. I mean, having Professor Enloe here was great. I feel energized and empowered, and plus listening to all of these great presentations is also inspiring. So today, let me start sharing my screen now, because I also have a PowerPoint presentation. I hope it's okay. You can see it, right? Okay. So my presentation, my article is about Islamic-oriented self-help discourse, and particularly the marriage advice that is offered in this, what I called Islamic-oriented self-help culture in Turkey. And I will also try to underline, try to demonstrate the ways in which it relates to sustaining patriarchy in contemporary Turkey. So first of all, when it comes to the neoconservative politics of family and marriage, there is actually a substantial amount of work, especially regarding the political interventions, especially political discursive interventions into marriage and family in a neoconservative framework. So how is this framework drawn in previous research? It's argued, it's very well documented that there is a discourse towards regulating and disciplining the family and formulating it as strengthening the family, responsibilizing the family, and within this family, locating female subjectivity within this framework, strictly within this framework of marriage, family, and motherhood, responsibilizing women for care work within the family. So, I mean, this is all pointing out to a framework within which women are very much responsibilized for care work and for family work in general. Also, this is supported by an essentialization of gender identities by the endorsement of gender justice as opposed to gender equality, and widely popularized under the concept of fıtrat, which has become, I think, like a buzzword among the, within the political discourses on gender. Fıtrat, that refers to God-given gender disposition, so has the Islamic undertone to it, but also it's a concept that's very useful because it essentializes gender identities. Plus, there is also a very inspiring body of work on the institutional penetration of Islamic discourse into the regulation of family and marriage, particularly regarding the expanding role of Diyanet, the Presidency of Religious Affairs, through many many organizations like female preachers, the opening up channels for them to give advice, particularly to women, marriage schools, family courses for young women, etc. So there's also a literature on this, how the Islamic discourse is penetrating. However, I'm looking into another dimension today, which is, I think, very much understudied and under-researched, Islamic-oriented self-help culture. So the Islamic-oriented self-help culture in Turkey is, I mean, its characteristic is a very eclectic one. It brings together references to Islam on the one hand, spirituality on the other hand, and it not even necessarily Islamic spirituality, but New Age spirituality that we typically see in the Western self-help culture. And also globally circulating notions of therapeutic rhetoric and self-help rhetoric and popular psychology discourses. So it's really wildly eclectic in terms of bringing all of these together within one breath. And we see the popularization of this of the culture through, I mean, I can even call it a cultural industry, especially since the 2010s. Of course, there's a non-Islamic or secular version of self-help culture as well in Turkey, but the Islamic-oriented version has been popularizing, especially since the 2010s, which started with the publication of some extremely popular, extremely well sold books that brought together as diverse references as, you know, from Osho to Quran to Hadith, everything, you know, blended together. So that the extreme popularity of such books were followed by many different products, and today there is a huge popularity with best-selling books, social media influencers with millions of followers, TV shows, and, you know, in any bookshop that you will go into, you will see today a separate section dedicated to self-help culture on the one hand, and Islamic self-help culture will, Islamic self-help books will be a large part of that. So I'm looking into that. And the data that I am focusing on is, I'm focusing on these three authors that you, I hope, can you see these three people here? One of them, Fatih Reşit Civelekoğlu, he's a, you know, he's a psychologist, psychotherapist. He's very popular among the conservative population, and all of these three, by the way, have many books, and wide popularity and wide public visibility. They are very active on social media. So Civelekoğlu is a psychologist. Hatice Kübra Tongar, the big picture, is the most popular of all. Her books are big bestsellers. She has millions of followers on social media. And Tuba Kılıç is, she has again, she's a psychologist, and she has a therapeutic show, TV show on Diyanet TV, and also again popular with her books and social media presence. So I'm looking into their marriage advice. They mostly give marriage advice, you know, occupies a lot of their influence. And for example, Fatih Reşit Civelekoğlu is a regular daytime TV show guest. He's almost always on Beyaz TV, and he's always giving this advice on marriage. So I'm looking into their YouTube and Instagram posts, and plus their interactions with their followers that they receive to those posts. So these are also their books. Each of them has written one book that is specifically about marriage, how to heal marriages, quote unquote. So I'm asking which meanings and narratives are produced in these by these authors regarding marriage and marital problems. in what ways do these therapeutic interventions maintain and legitimize patriarchy? And alternatively, also, is there any possibility for subversion and empowerment in this advice for women? And in, how does this relate to this broader context of neoconservative politics of marriage and family? So in general, the findings suggest that, well, the first thing that comes to our attention when we come into the field, when we start looking into the data, is that the majority of, an overwhelming majority of audience is women. Women are the consumers of therapeutic culture. That seems the case. And in the case of the Islamic-oriented self-help authors, they are addressing to women almost exclusively. They talk a lot about men, as I will now, demonstrate, but they talk to women about men. So there is, I think the very important, very predominant finding that I can take out from this research is that this discourse is very much, this marriage advice is very much based on psychologization of patriarchy, by which I mean that marital problems, which are actually rooted in gendered inequalities, in gendered power relations, are framed as individual psychological issues that can be cured psychologically by using psychological means. Plus, also framed as the consequences, problems are framed as consequences of people losing their fitrat, people losing their essence. That's how they formulate it. So now I will break down this, this general ball of findings. First of all, there are tropes in the narratives on marital problems. There's a very apparent and patterned narrative on marital problems. So within this narrative, the first trope, one of the most salient tropes, is an abundant talk, an abundant problematizing of men as husbands, as this is about all about heterosexual marriage, all of this advice. So they are talking a lot about absent, distant, indifferent husbands, and over-dominating, they call it narcissistic, oppressive husbands as well. So there is a huge tendency to pathologize men. Narcissism seems to have become like a buzzword or a very useful word to psychologize, to frame in a psychological framework, actually patriarchal attitudes, it seems. So men who are being very self-centered and who are really like using their wives to their own good and oppressing them, mostly formulated as, this is narcissism, it's a psychological problem and we can heal it, and there are ways to get along well with narcissistic husbands. Fatih Reşit Civelekoğlu is even selling like a therapeutic package of how to deal with, teaching people how to deal with narcissistic men. So the pathologization also depends on the argument that men are stuck in adolescence. They cannot get out of their adolescence and become grown-ups. So interestingly, even though there is so much pathologization of men, the authors are addressing their advice to women, because women are designated as the fixers of marriage, as the ones who are responsible for pushing their husbands towards being grown-ups. Men are mentioned within this advice. Men are mentioned in the third person, absolved from their responsibility to grow up, and responsibility is placed on their mothers and their wives. Mother-in-laws, I will not talk much about that due to time limitation, but the mothers of men are very much, or mothers of grown-up men are very much blamed for keeping their sons dependent on themselves and preventing healthy marriages. So most of this advice is actually about trying to understand what the problems, what the huge problems in marriages are and how to solve them. So the first big blame is put on mother-in-laws. And of course, secondly, on the wives, on women who are actually also the main audience of these authors. Women are actually kept responsible for mainly for two things. One, for being sexually distant and for not being at peace with their own sexuality, therefore driving men away. And two, for being too much emotionally dependent. That's why they are formulated as unable to receive respect from their spouses. So, for example, Tongar, I think I will have to make this a bit smaller because I can't see all of this. Anyway, I will read as much as I can. Tongar, who gives family consultancy, couples consultancy, she argues that many married couples who come to her don't have any sexual life at all. And she asks them, why don't you try to spice it up a little bit? They tell me that it would be shameful. Some women, some ladies cover their heads even in bed and say that this is taqwa. Fine, but if this will harm your marriage, what kind of taqwa is that? There is no shame in women's and men's sexual needs and desires as long as these are within the circle of halal. So she is actually encouraging women, and this is, you know, just one quotation, but this is a very common trope within this advice, encouraging women towards making peace with sexuality within marriage, but encouraging women to pursue sexual pleasure. That's one trope that comes as striking in here. And also the argument, there's this encouragement towards becoming self-esteemed grown-up individuals that is given to women. For example, this was a very striking example. A follower of Civelekoğlu asks him, or it's more right to say that it shares an experience of hers. And she says, I have a husband who is very bad towards me, but I have made up my mind. I'm now at peace. I have decided to become a saliha wife, saliha eş, which means, you know, abiding by all the Islamic precepts. So God will be okay with me and I will be okay. So Civelekoğlu, in response, in a very popular YouTube video, he says, don't do that. If you become such a wife, you are without being a grown-up first, without developing your self-esteem first, then you will end up a slave. And this strikes a chord among the followers. And there's an outpour of comments. A lot of women are applauding him, but also there are women who are really underlining this contradiction here. And they say, Hocam, you are so right, but what can I do? I don't have an income of my own. And I don't have any prospects. So how do I not become a slave? Where do I get that self-esteem? So this is really a glaring contradiction, a tightrope that these Islamic oriental self-help authors are trying to walk. Because on the one hand, they are calling back to fitrat and essentializing gender identity. And they are portraying this living with your fitrat as the key to happiness, with clear anti-feminist tones, with very familiar anti-feminist undertones, arguing that men and women, they lost their fitrat, that's why marriages are failing. Women are trying to be strong and competitive. They are stealing their husbands' victories. And so they should become self-esteemed individuals, but also they should not become competitive in a masculine sense. and they should all do it all together. And the struggle of women to be equal, this has harmed marriages. That discourse is clearly there. But on the other hand, they're also advising women to receive respect and keep alive their husbands' interest and respect in them and desire in them by becoming, finding their authentic selves, and by being self-esteemed. And also, for example, Civelekoğlu tells women, don't beg for your husband's affection. It's enough that you approve of yourself. So the last trope within the narratives is this great call, this huge call to make masculinity great again, calling men back to their God-given natural powers. So even though living and breathing men are extremely pathologized, masculinity is glorified within this discourse. So, and this is from Civelekoğlu, where there is a real man, he says, there will be no unfairness, no injustice. He is like a mountain. In a very, and this is a YouTube speech, and it's very passionate. He's very passionate in doing it. Only one man is enough. Even his shadow is enough. Masculinity is defined. God's glory is manifested in man. Such a man is like a star in the sky. He is a joy to watch. We will protect Fıtrat, he says. Men shall be like men, women shall be like women. So as a conclusion, what this research shows us in terms of the sustainable patriarchy, on the one hand, there's a psychologization of social and structural power inequalities. There is an ambivalent relation to the neoconservative framework here, because women are, on the one hand, advised to be not needy, advised to be emotionally strong. So there's that when Cynthia Enloe was today talking about this walking the walk, talking the talk concept, there is there seems to be some superficial attempt to talk the talk here, to speak to women's desires to have more fulfilling lives by sugarcoating what they are talking about with global pop psychology advice. So become emotionally strong, find your authentic selves, don't beg anyone for affection, etc. And also, this is supported by the encouragement for women's pursuit of sexual pleasure, albeit within the circle of marriage. And from the followers' comments, I can see that this is very fresh for many of them. This is very new and very bold for some of them. But on the other hand, while this is the talk the talk part, there is also a very strict limits put on being a grown-up individual. They are very rigidly drawn for women. They are expected to act, they are advised to act according to their fıtrat, never get out of the roles of mother, wife, and caretaker. Also, plus responsibilized to raise their husbands, to make them stronger, to endorse their masculinity, and go with the glorification of masculinity, just try to make their husbands worthy of that glorified masculinities. So this is all, and thank you for listening. I will collect the questions later if you have any. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Feyda Hocam. So we witnessed the psychologization of social and structural power inequalities. I would like to highlight that point especially. So the problem is a social one, it's a structural one, but it is seen as a psychological problem that women have to take responsibility for instead of the structure, the system, which is not questioned at all. Thank you very much for your great research, indeed. Now, last but not least, we will be listening to Birgül Demirtaş. She will be talking about perceptions of male scholars towards gender, reconsidering sustainable patriarchy in Turkish academia. The stage is yours, Birgil Hocam.
Just a second. I hope you can see my presentation. Yes, as Zuhal Hocam mentioned, this presentation, this paper is about the perceptions of male scholars in Turkey in the Department of International Relations toward gender. Why is it important to investigate, to research the gender perceptions of male academics? You know, in Turkey or in international literature generally, when we think about academia and gender, we mainly research on female academics. But there is very little research on male academics. You know, when I was working on gender, I was curious about whether there is any study on the male scholars in Turkey or abroad. I have found only a few of them. Therefore, I thought, you know, it might be kind of meaningful to understand what the male scholars think about a gender issue. I think it is also important to have any kind of gender equality in Turkish academia or anywhere. It is essential for female and male academics to cooperate. But first of all, we need to investigate their perceptions as well. We need to understand it, we need to try to conceptualize it, we need to think about it. And I have the following research question on my mind. How do Turkish male academics perceive the working environment in terms of gender equality or inequality in general? And how do they interpret the issue of gender in academic promotion and managerial positions as well? And I had the opportunity to have a research based on interviews with 80 male academics working in 48 different universities in 26 cities in all 7 regions of Turkey between February 22 and April 2022. And they were working at 13 foundation and 35 state universities. It is a qualitative study, and it is the most comprehensive study about male scholars in Turkey. And I could reach about 9% of all male academics in the international relations discipline in Turkey. But I must admit from the very beginning that it is not so easy to have a research with male academics. You know, when you have a research, and Zuhal Hocam and I have already a study with regard to female academics, and you know, it is easy to talk with female academics and to ask their opinions about gender, but when it is about males, it is not easy to formulate the email, to have the questions, and some of them just rejected it. Some of them maybe did not understand what I had been trying to do. It is not an easy job. I mean, it is kind of a challenging research, maybe the most challenging research in my academic life. When we look at the masculinity studies in general, in the literature, it started in the 1970s. And the first researchers have started by asking several questions like, how are masculine identities constructed? And how are men socialized? And how the masculine attitudes emerge? But from the very beginning, these studies are pro-feminist, and they have consisted of critical voices. I mean, they have always advocated gender equality. And I will, in my research, I have found out 5 different opinions of male scholars in Turkey. And the first category of scholars stated that there is gender equality at university. That is a very classical approach. They stated that, you know, many of them stated that, you know, the rules for appointment and the criteria for appointment and promotion are just written. Therefore, you know, how can be interpreted differently? the process of a recruitment is kind of just, it is just because the rules are written. Therefore, we have been talking about what we have been experiencing is kind of a fair and just processes. And one of the interviewers stated that academic promotion criteria, I think it is fair. At least there is no injustice in the department. I have not witnessed that man or woman are prioritized. And a second citation, there is no statement about gender in criteria for academic promotion and appointment. Since there is no gender discrimination, gender is not mentioned in the academic criteria. Therefore, there is no problem with regard to gender inequality. And the second category of answers consisted of those who state that we are perfect, our department is perfect. There is 100% gender equality in our department, but there are some problems at some other departments, at some other faculties, at some other universities. And I call it relocating inequality. We are perfect, we are 100% equal, but there is inequality somewhere else. They just relocate it. They think that it exists, but not in their department. For example, especially some of them refer to the small Anatolian province. There is no problem in the big cities, but there are problems in the Taşra, the so-called Taşra regions as well. But one of the interviewers stated that I hear that there are such difficulties, especially in conservative cities and in male-dominated departments. I have not witnessed it myself. But the female academics have opposite ideas. In our research with Zuhal Hoca, we have found out that among our interviewers, 88% of them stated that they face discrimination, either at the level of discourse or at the implementation level or at both. But here in the Turkish case, most of the male scholars think that there is not any problem with regard to gender issues at universities. And the third group of those, the third category stated that there is inequality. They acknowledge. For example, just an example from one of the quotations, I think that those who do not see women do not want to see them, do not love them, or do not want to accept that they are as successful as themselves, or they are more successful than males. And this approach is very common and dominates the center of the academy. And one of the interviewers stated that he tried to support the female academics on every occasion in his department at his university. But sometimes he also faced criticisms from female colleagues as well. And he was asked the question of, why are you helping the female colleagues so much? Why are you so much supporting the gender equality? Do you have some hidden agenda? Do you have some different aims? He faced those questions. And some of the interviewers stated that, as we have also talked with Cynthia Hoca, gender equality as a show business for some of the universities. One of the interviewers stated that this distance increases even more when it is considered that some of the practices are only symbolically implemented by the management in order to show the outside world that they attach importance to this issue. Internalizing gender equality at all levels has been out of the question. He mentioned that at his university there is a center for gender issues. But what he perceives is that it has been established just for promotional purposes. The university does not have any kind of real purpose of having gender equality, but they want to, they want to instrumentalize this center just for promoting the university. Another group of respondents stated that, yes, there is problem with regard to gender, but that is not the only inequality. There are different inequalities going on at Turkish universities at this moment. One of them stated that promotion criteria in my organization are arbitrary and unfair. However, this arbitrariness is not related to gender. Academic promotion criteria are unfair, regardless of being male or female, depending on nepotism, political affinity, and social network. And one of them stated it is definitely possible to talk about such difficulties for women, but it is also possible to talk about similar difficulties for Kurdish, Alevi, and even secular academics, especially in conservative neighborhoods in Turkey. And he also mentioned that with regard to media programs, yes, no, there are just a few female academics in the Turkish TV programs, in so-called debates, but Kurds are not there either, or Alevi people, I mean those with Alevi identity. It is not the only inequality they argue. And the fifth group of scholars, they have been trying to otherize or even securitize the feminist scholarship in Turkey. And they have been asking the question of what these feminist scholars are trying to do. And one of them stated, raising awareness of gender equality requires getting out of the shadow of feminist understanding and building a new paradigm. The effort to achieve gender equality should not lead to desexualization. I think it has become a cliche, I mean, to name feminism as such. And one of the interviews stated, we should emphasize the concept of human being rather than woman and man. And in fact, this is a kind of very appropriate for the current political zeitgeist in Turkey. And one of the respondents has even stated that the female mindset has not yet adapted to this discipline as much as the male mindset. As a matter of fact, the fact that women mostly prefer to study more technical and secondary subjects in the discipline strengthens this opinion. However, we all know that, we experience that. Women are working on all issues in international relations. It is not only European Union or environmental issues, like security issues. There are women specializing in every field of the discipline, but they do not want to see it. And one of them stated, the female academics are using feminism to get what they don't deserve. I mean, he accused the feminist scholars to have some kind of prizes or some benefits just by using their femininity, by using their gender. And it was not also easy, to analyze all these discourses. Sometimes I got quite angry, I should admit. And I noticed that the discourse of the current political neoconservative zeitgeist is almost 100% mirrored in some of the interviews. And this approach, these opinions, they in fact maintain the patriarchy in academia. And these discourses just help the sustainable patriarchy being maintained in Turkish academia. As a conclusion, there are different perceptions with regard to gender issue among male academics. With regard, as a comparison to the previous research on the subject, my study reveals the perceptions of male academics who just relocate inequality elsewhere. And this is a new finding in the masculinity literature, I can say. And secondly, also for the first time in my research, I found out that the situations where gender equality is not internalized at universities, but gender activities or activities on gender equality or Center for Gender Studies are used for promotional purposes. For the first time, there is just such a discourse in any academic work. And in fact, my study also revealed that male scholars in general accept academic promotion and appointment as it is, and they do not question and how and by whom the promotion criteria are being written, under what conditions it is being determined. They do not talk about it. The rules are written and there is equality, that's all. And I would like to emphasize the impact of political zeitgeist. And then I compare this research with our joint research with Suhal Hocam with regard to female academics, then I just think that it is like men scholars are from Mars and females from Venus. I mean, majority of male researchers that I interviewed do not have any idea of what women scholars experience, and that is, I think, an important issue that we need to think about. And I hope this research kind of further give kind of impulse to new studies on the subject. And there's so much to do with regard to masculine studies in Turkey. Thank you so much for your patience.
Birgül Hocam, thank you very much. This is such an important topic you dealt with, and to show so openly that most men don't understand the problems that women academics face on a daily basis. This is really important, and this is also to make an advertisement for us, why at TED University we also do have colleagues who work on critical masculinity studies, and directly they work with men in order to change the understanding of masculinity. Thank you very much once again. Yes, we have listened to 6 wonderful presentations about the articles. Thank you to all our guests for all their patience also. Now the stage is yours to ask questions or to make comments if you like. Feyda Hocam, please.
Thank you very much. I don't know how to raise a hand in Zoom, I realized. Thank you for these excellent, inspiring presentations. My question is actually for everyone. I have a question. First of all, for Başak Hoca and Gülriz Hoca. Recently, I mean, there is also a research that talks about remasculinization as a motivation for radicalization. This kind of research actually mostly focuses on the recruitment of people from the Western world, to recruitment of men who live in Western countries to Islamic radicalization. And the argument is that the masculinity crisis and the promise of remasculinization is a motivation. So did you come across any such motivation in your field work? That was my question to you. And for Birgül Hoca, apparently as a female academics, we cannot even disseminate our experience to our own colleagues. So do you have any suggestions for how we might do that? Thank you.
I can start. Thanks a lot, Feyda Hocam, for your question. Yes, we have seen this remasculinization trend because, as suggested in the literature and confirmed by the field, men also seek to become heroes. So there is this, famous saying, from zero to hero. So they are looking for self-esteem, meaning, sometimes emancipation from their previous lives by joining the Islamic State, so-called Islamic State. So obviously these trends are not immune or devoid of what is going on the world scale. So we have remasculinization of politics from 9/11 onwards. And I think that is very much reflected in this jihadi movement, Salafism. So this from zero to hero, this heroism, proving their manhood by fighting, in the name of God, etc. All these narratives and, searches are very much prominent in the field of, men's radicalization. As to women, there's also a search for, heroism, but not as individuals, but rather as wives or, bearers of jihadis. So I think I don't know if Başak Hocam has more to say on this, but we see that trend in our field. Thank you.
I would agree with Gülriz Hocam, more or less, yeah.
Thank you very much.
I can continue, Zohan Hocam. Thank you very much for your question, Ferda Hocam. In my research, about 1/3 of respondents, male respondents, has been, they have accepted the problems of female scholars. They stated that yes, there is gender equality and women really suffer, they face discrimination. I think we need to cooperate with this 1/3 of male scholars. It is important to talk to them, to cooperate with them in different ways. There are also those who are from males as well. They understand what we have been experiencing. Second, some of the males have mentioned in a very kind of detailed way their kind of how they felt in this sustainable patriarchy, so to say. They stated that they also suffer a lot because of different reasons. For example, they have given the example of circumcision, how they affect, how this practice affects a kid. You are just a child and you have been losing a part of your body without your permission. And they have mentioned the issue of conscription, for example. Therefore, it is also quite important to work on these, male vulnerabilities, because this sustainable patriarchy, this neoconservative environment, in fact, have harmful effects on a male as well. And then we, of course, we have been we have been researching about the problems of females. There's a lot to do that. But in fact, to further research with regard to these vulnerabilities of male would also be helpful, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. Yes. It's not just us who are disadvantaged in a patriarchal setting, of course. It's also men. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And we can also say that in critical masculinity studies, they say that men will also be empowered if we overcome patriarchy. So equality is for all. So it will not just be useful for women, but also for men and for all genders. So to highlight that would also be useful, I guess. Thank you for the answers. Thank you for the question also. Do we have any other comments or questions from our guests? No, I don't see any questions. Then I would like to thank you all for joining this. It was wonderful for me. I was very excited. It was really, really great. Yıldız Hocam, yes, Yıldız Hocam, I want to thank you especially for taking all your time and listening from beginning to end. Thank you, a very special thank you to Yıldız Hocam also. Thank you for all your contributions, all your questions, all your comments. Maybe a final picture. I like these pictures. Tuğçe maybe can take one more. Thank you again. All right, then once more, thank you very much, and hoping to lessen patriarchy as soon as possible and to overcome patriarchy. Thank you very much. Nilgün Hocam, the last words are from you. The stage
Thank you so much. I just want to note that Turkish Studies is 25 years old. And in its history, our issue is the second one is the second special issue or special section on gender.
Really?
A few years ago, Kürşat Çınar Hoca has published a special issue on gender, and our issue is the second one. I hope it will inspire new works. And thank you so much for all your participation. It was a long and challenging journey for all of us. We have achieved it. And I would like to say my thanks to all the authors, to all the participants. And I hope our works will be helpful, as Zuhal Hoca mentioned, in kind of minimizing the patriarchy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Tuğçe'cim, Yıldız Hoca'nın mesajını okuyorum da çok tatlı. Merhaba, nasılsın?
İyiyim hocam. Bir yandan teze bakmaya çalıştım. Şimdi devam edeceğim.
Evet. Yıldız Hoca'dan çok tatlı bir mesaj gelmiş. Diyor ki, yarım saatten fazla ayrıldım ve geri döndüm. Siz hala konuşuyorsunuz, tartışıyorsunuz. Bayıldım bu birlikteliğinize, grubunuza. Hepinizi gönülden kutluyorum. Çok tatlı değil mi? Şunu copy paste yap. Ay, kaydı durduralım, unuttum.
Ay evet. Keseriz hocam. Sorun değil.
Evet.